Chapter 2236. Happy National Day, everyone! Good food, good drink, and fun! The space-time storm raged and never stopped. No one knew what kind of mystery it contained. Even sovereign-level powerhouses found it difficult to find out. It had become an unsolved mystery. Ever since the destruction of the Great Void Divine Gate and the appearance of the space-time storm, it had been raging and had never dissipated. There were only occasional periods of exhaustion, but it would recover after a period of time. Fortunately, the space-time storm would not spread. Otherwise, the Western Void would have been affected and the entire Void would be in danger. Groups of imminent divinity cultivators shuttled through the space-time storm. Some of them looked old and feeble, but that was only their appearance. For imminent divinity cultivators, whether they looked old or young did not have much effect on their strength. It was just that some people broke through earlier, so they looked younger. Some people broke through later, so they looked older. Of course, some people liked to maintain a youthful appearance, while others liked to look old. The void was so big, and there were countless humans with all kinds of hobbies. It was not surprising that they looked like this. The space-time storm was very vast and was over 10,000 miles thick. After entering it, even the speed of imminent divinity cultivators was greatly restricted. They could not be as fast as they were in the void. Of course, even if they were restricted, their speed was not something that Yuanming cultivators and Dao manipulation cultivators could compare to. After all, everyone's speed and movements were restricted here. Imminent divinity cultivators did not need to move with others and did not need to wait. They could move forward at full speed and cross the space-time storm before others to enter the Great Void Divine Ruins. On the contrary, imminent divinity cultivators of sects and factions had to carry other Yuanming and Dao manipulation cultivators of their own sections. They had to control their own speed, so they were slower. However, when they entered thousands of miles, an unforeseen event occurred. There seemed to be a constant whistling sound in their ears. It was like the roar of a gust of wind blowing. Everyone could not help but tense up and feel a chill all over their bodies. In an instant, Chen Zong felt the pulling force around him become more chaotic. Then, a black wind swept over. The figure of his fellow sect member, who was flying in front of him, seemed to have escaped into a space-time black hole and disappeared. This scene made Chen Zong's pupils constrict. The howling of the wind was incessant, and then gusts of black wind blew past. Anyone caught in the wind was unable to resist, and this was the case even for transcendent experts. They vanished as if they had been sucked into a space-time black hole, but in the next moment, they would appear very far away without any pattern. In front and around them, the people from the Will Heavenly Palace disappeared one after another. Gradually, a gust of black wind blew towards Chen Zong. Chen Zong's strong perception allowed him to capture the black wind, but Chen Zong found that he could not dodge it. No matter what he did, he could not avoid the attack of the black wind. It was as if it had locked onto him. In an instant, Chen Zong felt as if he was being blown by his own black wind. His whole body seemed to be wrapped up. The feeling was very strange and unique. It was as if he was being carried by an inexplicable force into the depths of time and space. Darkness. All Chen Zong could see was darkness. It was so dark that he could not see anything. He even lost all his senses. In this darkness, Chen Zong did not know how much time had passed. Suddenly, he felt a strong force attacking him. He flung himself out of the darkness and reappeared in the space-time storm. However, he could no longer see his fellow sect members and elders from the Will Heavenly Palace. The plan to act together had been disrupted. The discussion on the Void spaceship had naturally come to an end. Of course, if they met along the way, they could join forces. After all, if he wanted to find and seize the three divine treasures of the Great Void, he alone was not enough. He would do his best. After all, this was related to his test for the Taoist. Of course, if he failed, he would have to take on other tests. The number of times a Taoist could fail a test was 3. If he failed more than 3 times, he would not be a Taoist. Chernzong had not failed yet. Of course, it would be best if he did not fail. He kept flying forward. As he flew, Chernzong saw a different scenery through the spacetime storm. In the next moment, Chernzong's figure rushed out of the spacetime storm. In an instant, he felt that all the binding force had disappeared. What appeared before him was a gray world that stretched as far as the eye could see. Vast, vast, sinking, ruins. An indescribable feeling passed through Chernzong's eyes and directly attacked Chernzong's spiritual will. Chernzong's mind was greatly shaken. The gray sky, the gray earth, the gray world, the countless collapsed palaces, and the broken walls formed a vast and boundless ruin. In the middle, there were some pitch-black void zones connected. They seemed to contain terrible danger, as if they were going to devour everything. This feeling was as if he had entered a world full of life and vitality into a world full of deathly stillness and despair. This kind of aura would make people feel uncontrollably oppressed. Chernzong could even clearly feel that the aura here was very chaotic and heterogeneous. There were at least hundreds of different auras. Moreover, the power of the Great Path was also very chaotic. It constantly collided and stirred up countless ripples. Chernzong's body was falling. Perhaps it was because of the chaotic power here, it was difficult to maintain flight. Although he was falling, Chernzong did not lose control or balance. Instead, he maintained a certain speed as he descended. As he was falling, a pitch-black crack suddenly appeared. It was very sudden. Chernzong was very alert. He reacted quickly and immediately dodged. He was almost affected by the spatial crack. That was not an ordinary spatial crack, but a space-time crack. It was of a higher level and more dangerous than a spatial crack. Chernzong, who was falling, found that the higher the altitude, the more frequent the space-time cracks would appear. The lower the altitude, the more stable it was. But stability did not mean that there would not be any space-time cracks, only that there would be fewer of them. There were no other people from the Heavenly Will Palace around. There were other cultivators, but the closest one was tens of thousands of meters away. With Chernzong's eyesight, he could see them clearly. It was an old man with a cultivation of the path manipulation realm. He should be a rogue cultivator. A sudden change occurred and a pitch-black crack appeared. The old man's perception was far inferior to Chernzong's, and in an instant, one of the old man's legs was affected. Without him noticing, the leg was swallowed up and completely disappeared. My leg, my leg. When the pitch-black crack disappeared, the old man felt that his left leg had disappeared. It was empty. He could not help but scream. He lost his balance and fell quickly like a meteorite. In the blink of an eye, the old man turned into a small black dot in Chernzong's eyes. Chernzong did not help because he did not know the old man at all. Besides, it was dangerous here. If he was not careful, he could encounter a space-time crack. Chernzong could not put himself in danger to save someone he did not know. Of course, if it was not too dangerous and not too troublesome, Chernzong would not hesitate to help. After all, since he wanted to enter this place, he had to be prepared to encounter all kinds of dangers. He even had to be prepared to die. The Great Void Ruins was not only a place full of opportunities, but also a place full of danger. Sometimes, one would not even know how they got hurt or how they died. Maintaining a uniform speed, Chernzong spread out his field of sword way. His perception was also raised to the extreme. After avoiding several space-time cracks, he successfully landed. Under his feet was the ruins of a collapsed palace. Broken walls and broken tiles piled up. The barren aura was very strong, as if it had been settled for countless years. Indeed, it had been settled for countless years. It had been countless years since the invasion of the Alien Alliance, a fierce battle that had lasted for hundreds of years. There was no specific pattern for the space-time storm to enter its period of exhaustion. Therefore, until now, the Great Void Ruins had been opened less than 100 times. Even though there were many people who entered every time the Great Void ruins opened and obtained many opportunities, there were simply too many opportunities in the Great Void ruins. What was obtained was only a small portion. Even if one entered 100 times, they would not be able to obtain all the opportunities in the Great Void ruins. After all, there was a time limit every time it opened. Within the limited time, one had to face many dangers. It was very difficult to obtain many opportunities. After all, only a small part of the people who entered the Great Void ruins could leave alive and obtain good opportunities. The rest either died in there or did not obtain much. Chunzong did not act immediately. Instead, he looked into the distance, determined the direction, and compared it with what he saw in the sky. He projected it in the deity ocean using his consciousness. It was vivid and lifelike, as if it was a miniature version of the ruins. After determining the direction and thinking, Chunzong adjusted his body and took a step forward. He was not very fast, but not very slow either. He maintained a uniform speed as he moved forward. The field of Sword Way covered a radius of 1,000 meters. It was not fully extended, so his energy consumption was lower. Under the perception of his primordial spirit, everything around him was under Chunzong's control. However, Chunzong sighed again. Originally, he was going to move together with his brothers and elders from the Heavenly Intention Palace. In the end, such an unforeseen event happened and he became alone again. As expected, I am more suited to move alone. Chunzong could not help but sigh. However, moving alone was not a bad thing. While traveling together with the elders and senior brothers of the Heavenly Will Palace would ensure their safety, they would still have less freedom and flexibility to do so. Since his debut, he had been moving alone most of the time. Even if he occasionally joined forces with others, most of the time he would move alone. He was already used to it. Chapter 2237. Here, the aura was barren and chaotic. There were ruins everywhere after a fierce battle. The name of the ruins was true to its name. Although there were many opportunities in the Great Void Divine Ruins, it was not something that could be obtained just by entering. Perhaps such a situation would occur during the first opening. However, the opportunities that were easy to obtain had long been taken away by others during the first few dozen openings. Now, if one wanted to obtain any treasures or inheritances, they had to search for them. There were still many places that had not been explored. Chunzong saw a huge skeleton that was more than 1,000 meters tall. The skeleton was gray and covered with fine cracks. It exuded an ancient aura of death and desolation. From the remaining aura, Chunzong could determine that this skeleton must have been very powerful when it was alive. Unfortunately, it was now just a rotten skeleton. Not only were there the rotten skeletons of skeletal beasts, but Chunzong also saw the shriveled corpses of humans. They were also rotten and did not leave anything behind. Even if there was anything left, it would have been taken away by others. Some of the skeletons and dried corpses were complete, while others were incomplete. In addition, there were also some broken and decaying divine items that had lost all power. They were not taken away because there was no value in retrieving them. No matter how magnificent you were when you were alive, you could not withstand the erosion of time. Chunzong stared at the rotten corpse in front of him and could not help but sigh. His sigh seemed to echo with the wind in the desolate ruins. There were humans and foreign clans among the skeletons. As for what kind of foreign clans they were, one thing was for sure: they were very powerful when they were alive. They were even more powerful than he was now. However, they had all become dried bones and dried corpses. No matter how powerful they were when they were alive, they could not withstand the erosion of time. For a moment, Chunzong's eyes flashed with a hint of confusion. But it was only for a moment. The confusion immediately dissipated and was pierced, torn, and shattered by a ray of light that was as sharp as a sword. You could not withstand the erosion of time because you were not strong enough. The light in Chunzong's eyes became sharper. If you were strong enough, you would be so strong that even time could not do anything to you. That was right. You would die because you were not strong enough. After you died, you would become a dried corpse under the erosion of time because you were not strong enough. If he was strong enough, others would be the ones to die. With this thought in mind, Chernzong's eyes became sharper and brighter as if they could pierce through time and space. The haze and confusion that had just appeared in his heart disappeared without a trace. With a single stride, Chernzong passed by the corpse that knelt on the ground, and his footsteps became even firmer. Moreover, a type of grand aura was faintly condensing silently on his body, causing his aura to become even more condensed. Strong. Chernzong's belief was very simple, and that was to become stronger. As long as he was strong enough, all the conspiracies would be useless, and all resistance would be futile. No one could kill him, but they would be the ones to die. Become stronger. Enhance. He was stronger than anyone else, so strong that even time and space could not erase him. Chernzong reached out and pulled out a long sword from the broken wall. The body of the sword was mottled and covered with rust, and its aura was deathly still. With a slight shake, cracks immediately appeared on the sword. Chernzong was a little disappointed after a slight inspection. As expected, it was no longer able to hold on. Just like those powerful cultivators, it could not withstand the erosion of time. Of course, it was also related to the environment here. Surrounded by the space-time storm, the aura of the outside world could not enter at all. The aura inside was chaotic and heterogeneous. Without the nourishment of the relatively pure void yuan qi, the divine weapons and so on would naturally gradually lose their spirituality and power and eventually decay. If that's the case, what about the three great void divine weapons? Chernzong could not help but frown slightly as he pondered. Although godly artifacts were powerful, they also needed to be nourished by pure energy in order to maintain their power. Being isolated for a short period of time was not a big deal. Even if they would slowly lose their power, as long as they were not damaged, they could be nourished and restored. It was just a matter of time. There were even some secret techniques that could restore the power of a divine weapon in a short period of time without any side effect. However, ever since Chernzong entered the Great Void Divine Ruins, all the divine weapons that he had seen, whether they were broken or intact, had all decayed and lost all their power. They were useless and turned into scrap metal. Even if he brought them out, they would at most be treated as antique. If these divine weapons were like that, then what about the three Great Void Divine Weapons? Even though the three Great Void Divine Weapons were known as the supreme divine weapons of the Great Void Holy Sect and possessed mysterious and incredible power, they were still within the category of divine weapons. Once they were deprived of the nourishment of pure energy for a long period of time, and in a place like the Great Void Ruins where energy was chaotic and heterogeneous, their power would continue to be lost. Then, after so many years, would the power of the three Great Void Divine Weapons have also been lost? Would they become like the long sword in his hand? If so, then it would be meaningless. But thinking back, the experts of Will Heavenly Palace must have thought of this. This was not a small matter, but a big one. They should not have overlooked it. But they still wanted to find the three Great Void Divine Weapons. This meant that even if their power was lost, the three Great Void Divine Weapons would not be damaged fundamentally. Or even if they were damaged, they could still be restored. Suddenly, Chernzong felt that he was overthinking. The experts of Will Heavenly Palace must have thought of this, but he did not need to think too much. Once he entered this place, he would do his best to find the three Great Void Divine Weapons, and at least get one of them. Other than that, he would look for treasures or opportunities that were useful to him, and do his best to improve himself. Otherwise, it would be meaningless to risk entering this place. With a casual toss, Chernzong threw away the long sword in his hand and continued forward. His eyes were extremely sharp. It had been at least 4 to 6 hours since he entered. Although it was difficult to feel the passage of time, Chen Zong had not found any treasures so far. There were only some skeletons and divine weapons that were as broken as scrap metal. Suddenly, Chen Zong retracted his foot. He was a little surprised. He took another step forward to test the waters. Immediately, he felt the difference in gravity. After careful observation, Chen Zong found that the light in the area ahead seemed to be dimmer. But if one did not look carefully, it would be hard to notice. Twice. The gravity in this area was twice as strong as the gravity outside. Chen Zong walked in. Other than the fact that the gravity was twice as strong as the outside, he did not discover anything else. There were no treasures or inheritances. It was just an abnormal phenomenon caused by the collapse of the Great Void Inverse Yuan Space Turbulence Grand Formation. This was not the first time such an anomaly occurred. Then, Chen Zong found another anomaly besides the difference in gravity. That was the flow of time. In some areas, the flow of time was double or even triple that of the outside world. In other words, one breath outside was 2 or even 3 breaths in the abnormal area. Undoubtedly, such a place was the most suitable for cultivation. Thinking about it, a faster flow of time than the outside world meant more time for cultivation than others. But it was a pity that the auras in the abnormal areas with the flow of time were weaker and more heterogeneous. It was not conducive to the improvement of one's cultivation, nor was it conducive to understanding the mysteries of the Great Tao. The only thing that could be considered useful was understanding the Abhijna. After all, the flow of time was different. Understanding the Abhijna was mainly about understanding, not practicing. Of course, if one was in a place where the qi of vitality was rich and pure, and the mysteries of the Great Tao were clear, the effect would be better. It would often be twice the result with half the effort. Therefore, these places where the flow of time was doubled, tripled, or even tripled were useless. After that, Chen Zong found other abnormal areas. After entering, his qi cultivation was directly affected. It was difficult to use it, and he retained his body refinement strength. There were other abnormal areas that affected his body refinement cultivation, but did not affect his qi cultivation. In short, there were many strange phenomena in the Great Void Divine Ruins. However, Chen Zong estimated that a day had passed, and he had not found any opportunities. It was clearly inconsistent with the rumors in the outside world that there were treasures everywhere. During this time, Chen Zong only met one cultivator. They were about a few thousand meters apart. When the other party saw Chen Zong, he immediately changed direction and moved further away. He was very vigilant, as if he was afraid that Chen Zong would attack him. In this regard, Chen Zong did not say anything. Under normal circumstances, if others did not attack him, he would not take the initiative to attack others. However, Chen Zong could understand that person's actions. After all, it looked like that person was a lone cultivator in the path manipulation realm. A lone cultivator in the path manipulation realm could be considered lucky to be able to enter this place. Naturally, he would be more careful and cautious. He kept moving forward. After passing through a mostly collapsed palace, there was darkness. It was a darkness like a void. There was no light, no aura, and it was quiet and dead. This was also one of the dark areas that Chen Zong saw when he fell from the sky. After passing through this dark area, he would naturally enter the next area of ruins. The Great Void Ruins was a general term, but it was made up of tens of thousands of ruins. They were either directly connected to each other or separated by dark areas. After all, the Great Void Holy Gate was formed by the Great Void Yuan Inverse Space Twisting Formation arranged by 1080 stars. The entire Great Void Holy Gate was a great formation, and that great formation represented the Great Void Holy Gate. Back then, the Great Void Holy Gate was best at formations. Whether it was ordinary or void-level formations, the Great Void Holy Gate was the best at them. Back then, the 5 great holy grounds of the void each had their own areas of expertise. The Ru-E Heavenly Palace mainly cultivated the power of the mind. For example, the Thousand Tribulation Divine Flame Mountain was a flame superpower. For example, the Eternal Battle Fort was a variety of battle technique. For example, the Jiuan Hall was very good at body refinement. Of course, Qi cultivation was not inferior, and the Great Void Holy Gate was best at formations. Chapter 2238. Within the Great Void Immortal Ruins, there were tens of thousands of pieces of ruins of various sizes scattered all over the place. They were formed by the destruction of the stars but were unable to escape the restraints of the Great Void Inverse Dimensional Disruption spell formation. They collided and turned into pieces of land, forming the ruins. If one were to look down from the highest altitude, they would realize that the tens of thousands of pieces of ruins were distributed from the outermost area to the innermost area. They were like stars surrounding the moon. There was only one piece of ruins in the center, and it was also the largest piece. Every time the Great Void Immortal Ruins opened, everyone would first arrive at the outermost area of the ruins. Therefore, if there were any treasures or opportunities in the outermost area of the ruins, they would have been taken away by the people who entered before them. Even if there were any treasures left behind, they would be dug up every time they came. Therefore, Chernzong passed by 3 pieces of ruins and did not find anything. Of course, Chernzong only flew past them and did not search carefully. In general, even if there were any treasures in the outermost area of the ruins, they would not be too good. Furthermore, the opening time of the Great Void Immortal Ruins was limited. They could not waste time on the outermost area, so they had to go as deep as possible. If they found anything valuable along the way, it would not be too late to take it away. Moreover, Chernzong felt that the 3 Great Void Holy Treasures were unlikely to appear in the outermost area. They should be in the innermost area. This was a logical line of thought, but it was hard to say whether this was the case. Chernzong passed through the pitch-black void and entered the 4th piece of ruins. Chernzong saw another mummy. Chernzong did not deliberately remember which mummy this was. However, this mummy was different from the mummies and skeletons from before. There was something in his hand. It was a shuttle-shaped object. The shuttle-shaped object was about as thick as a child's arm and about a foot long. It was covered with lines and lines. It was a dull silver color, as if it was covered in dust. In a flash, Chernzong stretched out his left hand slightly and grabbed the air like a dragon stretching out its claws. The dim silver shuttle in the mummy's hand suddenly flew up and fell into Chernzong's hand. Of course, to be on the safe side, Chernzong's palm was covered with a layer of power to prevent any accidents from happening. When he held the shuttle in his hand, he felt it was slightly heavy, as if he was holding a 1,000-kilogram object. Of course, this weight was nothing to Chernzong. Chernzong observed it carefully and sensed it with his primordial spirit. He found that the structure of this object was somewhat strange. It was somewhat different from those divine artifacts he had seen before. The crisscrossing patterns gave off an indescribable sense of mystery. Formation artifacts, Chernzong said. This was what the Transcendent Realm Elders had said on the spatial ship. The Great Void Holy Sect was best at formations. They also dabbled in the art of forging weapons. It could be said that formations were the Great Void Holy Sect's main cultivation, while forging weapons was secondary. The divine artifacts forged by the Great Void Holy Sect were also known as formation artifacts by the outside world. They were unique divine artifacts that belonged only to the Great Void Holy Sect. The reason why they were called formation artifacts was because they were different from other divine artifacts. Of course, formation artifacts were also divine artifacts. Hence, they were collectively known as divine artifacts. For example, the 3 Great Void Divine Artifacts. However, the 3 Great Void Divine Artifacts could also be called the 3 Great Void Formation Artifacts. As this thought flashed through his mind, Chernzong carefully studied the shuttle in his hand. He was increasingly certain that this was the Great Void Formation artifact of the Great Void Holy Sect. As for what he had seen before, they were all normal divine artifacts. Their forging methods were obviously different from those of the Great Void Formation artifact. Chen Zong did not know much about Formation artifact. This was the first time he had seen one. Hence, he was unsure whether the shuttle in his hand was good or bad. In that case, he would give it a try. He tried to infuse his own Taichu sword essence into it. He felt the shuttle in his hand tremble slightly. The mysterious patterns on it seemed to light up. However, the speed was very slow. It was as if there was something blocking it. He could feel heavy resistance. Chen Zong increased the output and infusing of his Taichu sword essence. More patterns lit up. When all the patterns were lit up, it was as if dust had been wiped away. The dim silver also became brighter. It was faintly resplendent. Chen Zong could feel that there was a power gradually awakening within the shuttle. It was as if it was awakened by his own power. It was as if it was waking up from a deep slumber. TSK, TSK, TSK. Ear-piercing sounds rang out. Streaks of silver-white electric arcs spread out from within the shuttle. They flickered and leaped, emitting a dazzling light. Go! With a silent command, Chen Zong waved his hand. Immediately, a streak of silver-white electric light shot out from the shuttle. It was like a silver thunderbolt. It was very dazzling. It carried with it terrifying power. It tore through the air at an astonishing speed. With a boom, a broken wall was directly hit. It was instantly destroyed and turned into dust. Streaks of silver light flickered in the air. This power is almost equivalent to the combat strength of the 10-star Dao manipulation realm. Chen Zong thought to himself. Although it was not bad, it was useless to him. After all, his combat strength had long surpassed the Dao manipulation realm. However, Chen Zong also discovered that the formation artifact was not complete. Or rather, it was damaged. Perhaps that was why it was not powerful enough. However, Chen Zong felt that even if the formation artifact was complete, it would not be as powerful as him. This thing was better than nothing. Chen Zong put it away. With a flash, he passed by the mummy and continued forward. Chen Zong also gradually discovered that the deeper he went into the ruins of God, the more chaotic the aura was. It was more disadvantageous for cultivation. Fortunately, he had prepared enough pills. As the fifth true disciple of Exhilarating Palace, who had also received the title of Unparalleled Divine Sword and was ranked first on the Divine Tablet of Exhilarating Palace, regardless of whether or not he could pass the Taoist test, there was no doubt that Chen Zong's talent was undeniable. Naturally, he would be taken care of. Passing through the fourth piece of ruins, Chen Zong found a shuttle formation artifact that could release the power of thunder and lightning. He did not gain anything else. Fifth, sixth, seventh, Chen Zong crossed another piece of ruins. During this period, Chen Zong naturally did not gain nothing. It was just that his gains were limited. By the time he reached the ninth piece of ruins, Chen Zong had gained a little more. He held a mirror in his hand that was half the size of a palm. It was bronze in color and looked simple and unadorned. The front of the mirror was smooth, but it was covered with cracks as if it had been struck with great force. The back of the mirror was covered with unique patterns. The patterns were very complicated and dense, and they gave off a very mysterious aura. There was no doubt that this was another formation artifact. Chen Zong also poured in Taichu Sword Origin. This time, the Taichu Sword Origin that he poured in was actually half of his own. A white ray of light blasted out of the mirror. It was as thick as a bowl, but it was extremely terrifying. It seemed like it could shatter everything. The destruction caused shocked Chen Zong. 6-star. This power was at the level of a 6-star Yuan underworld cultivator, but it consumed half of his Taichu Sword Origin. Chen Zong had no choice but to consume elixirs to recover. Chen Zong felt that if he continued to pour in more energy, the power might be even stronger. However, Chunzong did not try again. This was because there were even more cracks on the formation artifact. It gave Chunzong a feeling that it would shatter at any moment. Perhaps he was saving his strength for a final attack. Chunzong did not know that this bronze mirror-like formation artifact was a replica of one of the 3 great Void Divine artifacts. Of course, there were many replicas of the 3 great Void Divine artifacts. This bronze mirror-like formation artifact's full power attack should be extraordinary. It might even surpass his full power attack. As a means of attack, it was not bad. It could be considered the biggest gain from entering the Great Void Divine Ruins so far. There were all sorts of ways to increase one's combat strength. Some directly increased one's own cultivation, while others were external forces, such as this formation artifact. In some cases, external forces would be limited. However, this was usually a competition. When it came to life and death, all means would be used to kill the opponent and protect oneself. In a situation where there were no restrictions, it would be foolish not to use any means that one had. After passing the 9th piece of ruins, Chunzong flew past the pitch-black area and entered the 10th piece of ruins. Within the Great Void Divine Ruins, there were tens of thousands of pieces of ruins. The 10th piece could only be described as insignificant. It was still a long way from the center. However, Chunzong met a second person. This person was wearing purple armor with black edges. He was tall like an iron tower. The aura he exuded was very shocking. It was filled with a terrifying pressure that repelled the surrounding aura. This person also saw Chunzong. A smile appeared on his rough face. "Hello, you must be a direct disciple of the Will Heavenly Palace. I am a direct disciple of the Purple Extreme Hall of Jiuan. My name is Wang Tianding." This very strong young man immediately greeted Chunzong. "Hello." Chunzong nodded and smiled in response. "Did you find anything?" Wang Tianding asked with a smile as he walked over leisurely, shaking his shoulders. Then, he said to himself, "My luck is very bad. Since entering this place, I have only found a few broken array tools. Moreover, their power is very ordinary. I collect them more than I use them. However, I found a good array tool just now." This person's body was as strong as an iron tower, but his words were very eloquent, as if he was very familiar with others. Gradually, he walked in front of Chunzong and stretched out his bear-like arm. "Look, this is the array tool I just found." In an instant, something strange happened. Wang Tianding's outstretched arm swelled in an instant. It was as if every muscle on his arm had swelled up. The sound that burst out was very shocking. It was as if a taut bowstring had suddenly bounced. It was very shocking. Then, the strong arm also straightened in an instant. An extremely terrifying aura and power exploded, as if it was going to shatter the void. It directly attacked Chunzong's shoulder. Suddenly, very suddenly, very suddenly, just a moment ago, he was smiling and greeting in a very friendly manner. In the next moment, he suddenly attacked. Even when he attacked, he still had a smile on his face. There was no sign that he was going to attack. It was as if he did not hold back. If this punch landed, Chunzong's shoulder would probably be severely injured. This was because Chunzong could acutely sense that his opponent's combat power was very strong. He was an expert in the phenomenal divine body realm. Chapter 2239. Boom. It was as if the sky was falling and the earth was cracking. Chunzong didn't show any surprise or shock. On the contrary, he already knew about it. Yes, his opponent's every move was hard to guard against. It came without warning, but Chunzong's perception was extremely sharp. He had already caught it. Sword radiance burst out. The sword radiance burst out with unparalleled power. It fiercely split mountains and shattered the earth. It directly collided with the opponent's fist. His opponent attacked without warning, but Chunzong's sword was like a stroke of genius. It was extremely accurate. The collision of the fist and the sword caused a slight tremor. In an instant, an extremely terrible power burst out. A destructive storm raged in all directions, shattering everything around into powder. Wang Tianding's expression changed. Not only was his punch blocked, but the strength of his opponent's sword was also very shocking. It was extremely sharp, causing his fist to feel a sharp pain as if it was being torn apart. Another fist suddenly blasted out, followed by a bombardment of his legs. Every attack carried a terrible power that could destroy mountains. Sword formula of heart refining. Sword 4. With a swing of the sword, sword radiance burst out like a violent waterfall. It directly blocked all of the opponent's attacks and repelled him. Good skill. Wang Tianding laughed loudly. He suddenly stomped on the ground and burst out with power. He quickly retreated, making an astonishing sound like a mountain moving horizontally. Knowing that his opponent's combat strength was not inferior to his, Wang Tianding didn't plan to fight to the death. He was very straightforward. If he could win, he would fight. If he couldn't, he would retreat. There was no such thing as face. It was very practical. Of course, this was also because he didn't see any treasures that tempted him. If he did, it would be a different story. Wang Tianding was very fast and decisive. Chen Zong didn't chase after him. Instead, he raised his sword to his eyebrows and swung it. In an instant, the sword radiance pierced through the sky like a meteor. Although it was launched later, it reached Wang Tianding first. Wang Tianding's expression changed slightly. He suddenly turned around and punched violently. The fist force was like a dragon, making a shocking roar. It was powerful and overbearing. The sword radiance and the fist force collided and both collapsed. Borrowing the force, Wang Tianding moved even faster. Boom! His entire body shot far away like a shooting star. Not bad. Chen Zong watched as Wang Tianding left. He had no intention of pursuing him. At the end of the day, it was also because he lacked motivation. Moreover, Wang Tianding's combat power was not weak. He was at least at the 5-star level of the phenomenal success divine body realm. In this place, if it wasn't necessary, it would be best not to consume energy. At present, there was only one way to replenish energy, and that was to consume pills. The simple exchange with Wang Tianding made Chen Zongxing realize how dangerous this place was. There was no warning at all. Wang Tianding had greeted Chen Zongxing with familiarity and then attacked him mercilessly in the next breath with a smile on his face. This person was dangerous. It was a good thing that his perception was astonishing. If it had been someone else with ordinary perception, they probably would have fallen for it. Collecting his thoughts, Chen Zong looked straight ahead. His figure flashed, and he turned into a sword light and flew away at an extremely fast speed. Deep in, deeper and deeper. 23rd piece. Chen Zong passed through the pitch-black area and landed on a new piece of ruins. At a glance, a relatively complete palace appeared in front of him. It was a little hazy. Chen Zong's eyes lit up slightly. In the ruins in front of him, he didn't see such a complete palace. It was all collapsed walls and ruins. A complete palace could mean treasures and opportunities. In a flash, Chen Zong increased his speed. In a short while, he arrived in front of the palace. A mysterious aura shrouded the palace, and it seemed to be scorching hot. The door of the palace was half open and half closed. It seemed that someone had entered, but judging from the traces, no one had. Chen Zong didn't rush into the palace. He looked up and saw the plaque of the palace. He could also make out 3 ancient words: Refined Void Palace. Refined Void Palace. After reciting it silently, Chen Zong stepped into the half-open door of the palace. He immediately felt that the aura inside was different from the outside world. It wasn't as chaotic, and it wasn't as heterogeneous. There was a kind of purity that was similar to the void outside the Great Void ruins. Of course, there was still some difference. If that's the case, Perhaps the power of the treasures inside is more complete. Chenzong muttered to himself. At least according to his current experience, that was the case. Chenzong entered the first palace of the refined Void Palace. It was also the palace at the front. In this palace, there was nothing around except for a furnace that was taller than a person standing in the center. It seemed to be the center of this palace. Chenzong's sharp senses allowed him to feel that there was still a trace of scorching aura permeating from within the furnace. When he opened the lid of the furnace, the scorching aura became even more intense. Chenzong looked inside and saw a weak flame burning. It was green, like the flame of a candle in the wind. It could be extinguished at any time, but it was tenacious and stubbornly held on. It emitted a trace of heat. Using his primordial spirit, Chenzong determined that this was a divine fire. It was a core that was constantly depleting its power. That's right, this green flame was the core of the divine fire. Chenzong tried to transfer a trace of the purple world star dragon flame's fire aura. It was immediately absorbed by the flame. It seemed to burn more vigorously, but it was difficult to detect. I wonder if refining it will improve the purple world star dragon flame? Chenzong thought to himself. The purple world star dragon flame was at the peak of the low-level divine fire level. It was not easy to break through to the mid-level divine fire level. It could either cultivate slowly and accumulate bit by bit until it finally broke through. The other way was to devour other divine fires to nourish itself and break through its own limit. The purple world star dragon flame condensed and turned into a purple-red fire dragon. Dots of black light were distributed like dragon scales. It was magnificent. The fire dragon opened its mouth and inhaled. The green flame seemed to have no power to resist and was directly sucked into the purple world star dragon flame's mouth. A wisp of green light flashed across the purple world star dragon flame and then returned to silence. The purple world star dragon flame was refined by Chenzong using the blazing dragon breath refining technique. The purple world black star dragon flame had absorbed the essence of 10,000 flames and fire aura from the myriad tribulation god flame mountain, as well as the aura of the myriad tribulation god flame furnace. It was very powerful. More importantly, it was completely under Chenzong's control. It was one with Chenzong. Therefore, Chenzong could clearly feel that the wisp of green flame was being refined bit by bit after entering the purple world star dragon flame. It was increasing the accumulation of the purple world star dragon flame. However, Chenzong was not confident that it could break through to the mid-level divine fire level. With a wave of his hand, the cauldron was also collected by Chenzong. The cauldron itself was also a treasure. It was an array artifact that had been preserved relatively well. Even if he could not use it, he could sell it and exchange it for void coins. Pushing open the door of the small hall, Chenzong stepped into the second small hall. It was empty. In the third palace there was another furnace cauldron. Just like before, there was a flame, but instead of being green, it was red. After being absorbed by the violet universe star dragon flame, Chenzong took the furnace cauldron. He continued on until he reached the ninth small hall. In the ninth small hall, a figure was sitting. It was shrouded in darkness and could not be seen clearly. However, Chenzong could still feel that the aura inside was filled with death. There was no sign of life. It was not a living person. As if it had sensed Chenzong's entry and the aura of a living person, the figure shrouded in darkness suddenly trembled and let out a low roar. It was like the roar of a wild beast in the middle of the night. It was frightening. Chenzong's heart trembled. The moment he reacted, a black shadow flashed in front of him. A terrifying black light bombarded him. Extreme lightning. With the help of the Heart Palace, Chenzong's heavenly god armor movement technique, extreme lightning, which had already reached the great mastery realm, was instinctively unleashed by him. His entire body seemed to transform into a bolt of lightning as he dodged in an instant. At the same time, sword light suddenly shone. Sword 4. The dazzling sword light blended into the 5,000-meter sword principal domain and erupted with unparalleled power. It pierced through everything and accurately hit the black light. Although he could not see it, Chernzong was sure that his sword had hit the figure and pierced through it. Strangely, from the corner of his eye, Chernzong saw that the figure was still sitting in the darkness. It seemed that it had never moved. Danger struck again. Sword principal domain suppression. Primordial spirit perception. Chernzong realized that the figure was a black shadow. It was like a ghost. It was extremely fast and silent. No wonder it did not seem to have suffered any obvious injuries after being hit by Sword 4. Great World Sword Technique. Boundless Earth. The vast land unfurled like a painting when the sword was unleashed. It extended outwards and directly covered the black figure. The powerful suppressive force immediately caused the black figure to pause for a moment. Sword 4. As soon as the sword struck, it directly pierced through. Endless sword chi raged in the black shadow. Demon sealing spell. Chernzong pinched a spell seal with his left hand and cast the spell. The black shadow was obviously in the form of a ghost or an inner demon. It did not have a physical body. Maybe the demon sealing spell could work. Under the demon sealing spell, the black shadow erupted with amazing power and broke the spell. My young friend, please stop. The black shadow that broke the spell did not attack Chernzong. Instead, it spoke. Its voice sounded a little weak. Chernzong's sword that was about to strike suddenly paused. However, the power condensed on it did not dissipate. It was filled with amazing sharpness. His left hand was also pinching the demon sealing spell seal, ready to explode at any time. Who are you? Chernzong asked calmly. I am the Gu Su Holy Man, the Deputy Hallmaster of the refined Void Hall of the Great Void Sect. My young friend, you must be a disciple of the Heavenly Intention Palace. The Black Shadow's voice was still weak, but its words were much more coherent. Chernzong's heart skipped a beat. A Tao Master of the Great Void Sect. It has been many years since the Great Void Sect was destroyed. My young friend, you are the first one to come. The Black Shadow sighed softly. There was an indescribable sadness in its voice. I am also glad that my young friend came and temporarily suppressed this demonic soul. Only then did my consciousness awaken. However, my consciousness cannot be maintained for long. When the time comes, I will perish together with this demonic soul. I will not allow it to do any evil. Before that, could my young friend tell me about the current state of the void? Chernzong pondered for a moment and briefly described the current state of the void. It was not very detailed, but it was enough for one to understand. Chapter 2240. The palace was dim and dark. Chernzong's sword hung low, facing him. In that battle, all my array items were destroyed. I guess the 3 godly treasures were damaged as well. Lord Gu Su sighed. He already knew Chernzong's main purpose for coming here was the 3 godly treasures. However, the 3 godly treasures are the supreme array items of the Great Void Holy Sect. They were the culmination of the essence of the sect's array skills. They were peerless then, and even now, no one can surpass them. Lord Gu Su's voice was full of pride even though he was only left with a remnant of his soul. It was a kind of pride that came from deep within his bones and soul. It was an unshakable belief. The Great Void Holy Sect was unparalleled in array skills and weapon forging. If the Great Void Holy Gate had not been destroyed, the current level of array formation and weapon forging in the Void would have been even higher. Even though there were people who had obtained some inheritance of array formation and weapon forging in the Great Void Holy Ruins, it was still difficult for them to reproduce their former glory. As long as the 3 godly treasures are not damaged, they will recover automatically even if they are damaged. However, with your current strength, even if you encounter the 3 godly treasures, you will not be able to take them. Senior, please tell me what you want. If I can do it, I will do my best, Chernzong said seriously. I am only left with a remnant of my soul. The great void holy sect has been destroyed for countless years. What can I ask for? Lord Gu Su said self-deprecatingly. Don't worry, I don't have any requests. I only hope that the human race will become stronger. You are a true disciple of the heavenly palace of will, and you have met me. It is fate. Before my remnant soul dies, I hope that some of the great void holy sect's legacies will not be lost. I am only left with a remnant of my soul. I do not have enough power to imprint with my soul. I can only speak verbally. Listen carefully and remember. With the power of my remnant soul, I can only speak in detail once. How much you can remember depends on your ability. With that, Lord Gu Su began to recite. His voice suddenly became very mysterious, as if it contained some kind of secret of the great Tao in the void. It seemed to come from the void and floated into Chen Zong's ears. Every word carried an indescribable mystery, which left a deep impression on Chen Zong as soon as he heard it, as if it was going to be branded into his divine soul. Chen Zong had memorized every single word that Venerable Gu Su had said with his superb memory and comprehension, as well as Venerable Gu Su's self-sacrifice. He had memorized every single word that Venerable Gu Su had said. When the last word was spoken, a ball of light shot out from the black shadow. It was a dark light, but it seemed to be directed towards the light. Accompanied by a shrill roar filled with unwillingness, the black shadow started burning. It was the remnant soul of Honorable Gu Su that had perished together with the demonic soul. Chen Zong had learned a lot from the conversation just now. For example, the demonic soul was formed from the souls of powerful cultivators who had died in the great void divine ruins. Their souls had been corroded by the baleful aura and other negative auras for many years, and they were unwilling to give up. The stronger the unwillingness and resentment, the stronger the devil soul. Venerable Gu Su had a good mentality, so his devil soul was not very strong. Otherwise, Chen Zong would not have been his opponent. The devil soul had the ability to invade one's soul, take over one's body, and turn into a demon. However, its nature was different. In addition, Chen Zong also learned the names of some treasures, but unfortunately, he didn't know where those treasures were. The only good thing was that some clues might make it easier for him to find and discover them. It was better than nothing. The biggest gain was probably the inheritance that Venerable Gu Su had imparted. The Void Refinement Seal. It was also known as the 36th tier of the Void Refinement Realm. This was not an offensive or defensive divine ability, nor was it a cultivation formula. However, it was one of the most important and fundamental core divine abilities of the Great Void Divine Sect. The function of the 36th tier of the Void Refinement Realm was to refine the Great Void Divine Sect's formation equipment. According to Honorable Gu Su, the more powerful the Great Void Divine Sect's formation item was, the harder it was to collect it. One had to either have the corresponding Dharma incantation or use an extremely powerful force to suppress and collect it by force. Besides, there was a third method, which was the 36th tier of the Void Refinement Realm. In short, the 36th tier of the Void Refinement Realm was a commonly used auxiliary divine ability to refine Great Void Divine Artifact. It could replace some of the unique divine incantations of the Great Void Divine Artifact. Once cultivated to the extreme, it was possible to refine or even refine the three divine artifacts of the Great Void. Venerable Gu Su had imparted this technique to Chen Zong because of fate, but also because he did not want it to end. Although he was not the only Tao Master in the Great Void Divine Sect who had mastered the 36th tier of the Void Refinement Realm, no one could be sure that the other Tao Masters would be able to pass it down. Other than the 36th tier of the Void Refinement Realm, there were other auxiliary divine abilities. However, due to the exhaustion of the remnant soul and the devil soul, it could not be passed down. This was Venerable Gu Su's last regret. Chen Zong was naturally very attentive when it came to the collection of the 3 divine artifacts of the Great Void. Enlightenment. As one of the top auxiliary divine abilities of the Great Void Divine Sect, the Void Refinement Seal was naturally mysterious and profound. Even though Chen Zong had a high level of comprehension and was far superior to others, he still felt that it was very difficult. Other than its mystery, Chen Zong did not have enough understanding of array artifact. After all, the Void Refinement Seal was mainly used to target array artifacts, and the foundation of array artifacts was Array Dao. As for Array Dao, Chen Zong could only say that he had scratched the surface. He could not even be considered a beginner. He was only slightly better than those cultivators who had never come into contact with Array Dao. With a weak foundation and a high level of comprehension, Chen Zong did not leave the Void Refinement Hall. Instead, he continued to cultivate the Void Refinement Seal. Over and over again, the so-called Void Refinement Seal naturally condensed into a mysterious seal. At the first level, the seal was relatively illusory. It felt like a candle in the wind, as if it would be extinguished at any time. However, when Chen Zong cultivated to the second level, he realized that the Void Refinement Seal had become much more solid. Cultivation, continuous cultivation. For a moment, Chen Zong forgot about everything else. He formed a seal with both hands. In an instant, streaks of illusory flowing light were drawn in the void like a brush. They shuttled back and forth like butterflies. In the blink of an eye, they condensed into a mysterious seal. Void Refinement Seal. The third level is the limit of what I can comprehend right now. Although I can still continue to improve, the amount of time I need to spend is at least 10 times, or even tens of times more. Chen Zong thought to himself. Spending so much time just to reach the 4th level was too much. After all, the opening time of the Great Void Ruins was limited. For the first 3 levels, Chen Zong used the full power of the 10 intents of mind to deduce them. He was able to comprehend and cultivate them in a short period of time. As for the 4th level, it was even more difficult. Even if he had the power of the 10 intents of mind, he could not achieve it in a short period of time. However, Chen Zong could use the 2 intents of mind to comprehend the 4th level as he hurried along. It was less efficient and took longer, but it would not hinder his movements. The urgent thing now was to recover the mental strength that he had consumed. Void Refinement Hall. A figure descended and appeared in front of the hall. When he looked up, he was delighted. Then, his expression changed. Someone entered before me. In a flash, the black-robed figure immediately entered the Void Refinement Hall. It was empty, but there were still traces of the cauldron being taken away. It was still very fresh. Enter, enter, enter. The figure continued to enter until he saw 2 figures in the last hall of the Void Refinement Hall. One of them was Chen Zong, who was sitting cross-legged to recover his mental strength. The other was the body of Venerable Gu Su. The newcomer's gaze swept across the hall and landed on Chen Zong. His mind spun rapidly, and he made a decision in an instant. Attack. The treasures in the Void Refinement Hall must have been taken by this person. Since he was the first to arrive, he would be able to obtain the treasures as well as the treasures on his body as long as he killed this person. Of course, he also dared to attack because he sensed that this person's cultivation was only at the initial level of the Yuan Underworld stage, while he was at the middle level of the Yuan Underworld stage. The Yuan Underworld stage wasn't like the Dao controlling stage, where there were many divisions between the 1st and the 9th revolution. The difference between the initial level and the middle level was greater than the difference between the 1st and the 3rd revolution of the Dao controlling stage. Even if the other party was a genius, the disparity in cultivation would make the other party no match for him. Chen Zong had sensed this person the moment he arrived. He had also sensed the other party's cultivation. The reason he hadn't reacted was because his mental strength hadn't fully recovered. However, when the other party attacked, Chen Zong opened his eyes and a sharp light shot out like a sword. It seemed to be able to penetrate everything, causing the other party's heart to tremble and palpitations to erupt for no reason. There was no posture, but a sword light suddenly flashed in front of him. It was incomparably sharp and directly tore through the black light as if it was tearing the black sky apart. It was too fast and extremely sharp. The figure was so shocked that he couldn't dodge it at all. Kill! The sword slashed through the air. It should be known that although Chen Zong's cultivation was only at the initial level of the Yuan underworld stage, his combat strength could reach the 5-star level, which was very shocking. Although this person's cultivation was at the intermediate level of the Yuan underworld stage, his combat strength was actually only at the peak of the 3-star level. The difference between a 3-star level and a 5-star level was simply overwhelming. The sword light was withdrawn and returned to the scabbard. Chen Zong didn't get up. He continued to recover his mental energy. Only when his mental energy was fully recovered did he stand up. With a flash, he appeared beside the severed body. Even the person's soul hadn't escaped. It had been directly shattered by Chen Zong's sword. Otherwise, if a Yuan underworld stage powerhouse's soul had escaped after their body was destroyed, they could still survive for a period of time and take over the body of someone who hadn't condensed a soul yet. The other party's storage ring was also taken by Chen Zong. He checked it and found that it was relatively ordinary. There wasn't anything that could make Chen Zong's eyes light up. However, it was better than nothing. He treated it as a way to enrich his accumulation and wealth. His wealth had been accumulated little by little like this. As for the other party's identity, Chen Zong didn't pay too much attention to it. Regardless of the other party's identity, since the other party had made a move on him and tried to kill him, he wouldn't show any mercy. Of course, if the other party had the ability to escape from his sword, he wouldn't deliberately chase after them. It could only be said that this person was very unlucky. He had underestimated the difference in strength and was courting death. Chapter 2241. The Void Refinement Seal was profound and vast. As Chen Zong hurried along, he tried to comprehend it using his two minds at the same time. The efficiency was very low, and he did not know how long it would take for him to comprehend the 4th level. This was also because Chen Zong's foundation in formations was weak. After all, the Void Refinement Seal contained a large amount of the essence of formations and a small amount of the essence of craftsmanship. Within the Great Void Ruins, there were tens of thousands of wastelands. There were also many people who entered. There were at least tens of thousands of people in the Dao Manipulation Realm, Yuanming Realm, and Divinity Realm. They entered from all directions. In the beginning, they entered from the outermost area and gained nothing. But as they went deeper, they gradually gained more and more. However, they would also encounter each other and the competition would become intense, resulting in deaths and injuries. Chen Zong crossed one wasteland after another and went deeper. Although he did not know where the 3 great void divine weapons were, he thought that the deeper he went, the higher the chances of finding them. Unknowingly, time passed. Chen Zong had already crossed hundreds of wastelands and truly entered the depths of the Great Void Ruins. The deeper he went, the higher the chances of finding an opportunity. Chen Zong had obtained a lot of formation weapons. Of course, there were not many that could help him. A wave of mysterious fluctuation seemed to have attracted strands of invisible energy to gather around his body. It seemed to be condensing into an extremely mysterious mark. Chen Zong revealed a smile. He had finally comprehended and mastered the 4th level of the Void Refinement Seal. There were 36 levels of the Void Refinement Seal. Basically, the first 3 levels were a threshold. When he reached the 4th level, it was obviously more mysterious than the first 3 levels. As long as he mastered the 4th level, the next 5 and 6 levels would not be too difficult. The real difficulty was the 7th level. However, the 7th level was still far away from him. At least for the 5th and 6th level, Chernzong felt that because of his weak foundation in formations and craftsmanship, it was very difficult to comprehend. He estimated that he would need to spend 100 times more time and effort than the 4th level. Currently, the 2 hearts of one mind would no longer consume too much of his mental strength. After all, the recovery speed of his mental strength was extremely fast under various conditions, and it was enough to keep up with the consumption of the 2 hearts of one mind. Slowly comprehending it was better than nothing. As long as his foundation in formations and refining was supplemented, he would be able to comprehend the 5th level in a short period of time. As long as he comprehended the 5th level, he would be able to master it easily with his absolute control over his strength. The pitch-black area was vast, and the Great Void Divine Ruins was actually a miniature version of the Void. For example, the pieces of ruins were like galaxies or star regions, and the dark areas between them were like belts of nothingness. If one were to look down from the highest point of the sky, the entire Great Void Immortal Ruins could be divided into irregular rings from the periphery to the center. Chernzong stepped into a new wasteland. This wasteland was huge. Other than Chernzong, there were also many people who stepped into it. However, they all maintained a certain distance from each other and were very cautious. Those who could cultivate to the Ascension realm were no fools. After all, fools were already dead and the grass on their graves would have already withered over and over again. Furthermore, entering the Great Void Divine Ruins was a competition. Apart from oneself, even fellow disciples of the same sect would become targets of competition. As such, traveling alone was not a bad choice. Not long after, dozens of people stepped into the wasteland. Basically, they were all at the Yuanming realm. It was difficult for Dao Manipulation realm cultivators to arrive. Even if they did, they would lack the strength to compete. In the center of the wasteland was a huge tower. It was completely black and covered with dark golden patterns. These were formation path patterns, and they looked extremely mysterious. It was a formation path pagoda. The formation path pagoda stood majestically on the wasteland like a mountain, as if it was suppressing the wasteland. Formation Path Pagoda. Chernzong's eyes lit up slightly. The ancient Void Holy Man had said that there were many types of Formation Path Pagoda in the Great Void Divine Sect. They were divided into 5 levels, from low level to mid level, high level to top level, and then to supra level. The formation path contained in the low level Formation Path Pagoda was the foundation of Formation Path. In other words, it was not at the level of Void Formation Path. For example, the various formations that Chernzong had encountered in the Lingwu Holy World were the foundation of Formation Path. As for the mid-level Formation Path Pagoda, it contained the mysteries of star-level Formation Path. As for the high-level Formation Path Pagoda, it contained the mysteries of star-level Formation Path. As for the top-level Formation Path Pagoda, it contained the mysteries of star-level Formation Path. As for the super-level Formation Path Pagoda, it contained the mysteries of star-level Formation Path, also known as void-level Formation Path. There was only one super-level Formation Path Pagoda in the Great Void Divine Sect. There were as many as 10 top-level Formation Path Pagoda. There were hundreds of high-level Formation Path Pagoda. There were thousands of mid-level Formation Path Pagoda. There were tens of thousands of low-level Formation Path Pagoda. Of course, that was when the Great Void Divine Sect was still around. In the Great Battle back then, the Great Void Divine Sect was almost destroyed. Naturally, the Formation Path Pagoda was also severely damaged. This was especially so for the super-level Formation Path Pagoda. During the battle between the sovereigns, it eventually collapsed. It had to be said that it was a regret that could not be made up for. The top-level Formation Path Pagoda was also severely damaged. There was not much left. Most of the remaining ones were probably the low-level Formation Path Pagoda. However, According to the Gu Su holy man's guess, there were only a few hundred of them left. The one in front of him was the low-level formation path pagoda. In every formation path pagoda, one could receive the inheritance of formation path. Of course, there was a limit to the number of times one could receive the inheritance. According to the Gu Su holy man, every low-level formation path pagoda could only receive the inheritance 10 times. After it was used up, it had to be replenished. When the Great Void Divine sect was still around, it could be replenished. However, now that the inheritance was gone, there was no way to replenish it. According to the information that had been passed down, it could be determined that this formation path pagoda was a low-level formation path pagoda that contained the fundamental mysteries of formation path. However, was the inheritance of formation path still there? No matter what, since they had encountered it, it was fate. Of course, they had to give it a try. However, there were dozens of people. Only one person could receive the inheritance at a time. In other words, only those who reached the top of the formation path pagoda had the right to receive the inheritance. If there was only one inheritance, then only one person could receive it. As he thought about it, Chernzong's figure shot towards the formation path pagoda like a sword radiance. Ripples spread out like water. In an instant, Chernzong's figure disappeared into the pagoda. The other Yuan underworld cultivators did the same. The staircase that led to the next level was at the end. Basically, as the Great Void ruins opened many times, those who entered and exited would slowly organize the information and combine it with some information from the Great Void Divine sect to make deductions. Therefore, these Yuan underworld cultivators knew that this was a low-level formation path pagoda. They also knew that if they wanted to receive the inheritance, they had to reach the top. Charge! Dozens of people burst out at full speed and rushed towards the staircase. That was the only way to the next level. Get lost! The staircase was deliberately made very narrow so that only one person could pass through. Naturally, there was a need to fight. Someone immediately attacked the cultivators beside him without hesitation. "You're the one who needs to get lost!" There was a loud roar. Of course, no one started a fierce battle. Once a battle started, unless everyone was involved, it would only give others a chance to step onto the staircase. An extremely tyrannical light carrying a vigorous and overbearing power blasted towards Chernzong. Its power was so shocking that it made him feel pressured. Chernzong's eyes flashed as he unsheathed his sword. Sword light was vast and mighty as it slashed out. Extreme lightning. In the next moment, Chernzong took a step forward like a bolt of lightning. He was so fast that he surpassed everyone else. Stop him! The expressions of the others changed. If Chernzong reached the staircase first, he would be in the lead. Perhaps they would still have a chance to take back this temporary lead, but it would undoubtedly increase the difficulty. In an instant, dozens of powerful attacks blasted towards Chernzong without mercy. They would not hesitate to kill him on the spot. This was the time to fight. They couldn't care less about anything else. Great Void Escape Technique. Without hesitation, Chernzong executed the Great Void Escape Technique, which had reached perfection, and avoided dozens of attacks. He appeared on the staircase. There was a limit to the staircase, so he could only climb it. However, before he climbed the staircase, Chernzong still had to repay his debt. 11th level Blazing Core Flame. The power of the Taichu Sword Origin Body erupted. Great World Sword Art Boundless Earth. With a swing of his sword, the 5,000-meter-long sword Dao domain transformed into a vast expanse of land that swept out and enveloped the dozens of Yuan underlings. The terrifying power suppressed them like the suppression of the land. The profoundness of the Great World Sword Art was astonishing. The boundless earth suppressed the dozens of Yuan underworld cultivators, but every Yuan underworld cultivator suffered the same suppressive power. For a moment, the dozens of Yuan underworld cultivators were unable to move. After sheathing his sword, Zong turned around and stepped onto the staircase, climbing rapidly. In an instant, Zong rushed to the second floor. Some people also broke free from the suppression of the boundless earth and immediately rushed towards the staircase. There was still hope for them. However, Zong was a step too slow. Unless they were much faster than him, it would be almost impossible for them to overtake him. Zong used the Great Void escape technique and shook off his opponent. He once again stepped onto the staircase and rushed to an even higher floor. The low-level array formation pagoda only had 3 floors. Stepping onto the 3rd floor was the last floor. In the center of the 3rd floor of the low-level array formation pagoda was a circular platform that looked like an altar. Zong landed on it directly. This was the foundation stone of the array formation inheritance. A buzzing sound was suddenly heard and the surrounding lights seemed to be lit up. They flickered and shuttled back and forth continuously. Zong couldn't help but smile. This meant that the low-level array formation pagoda could also accept the basic inheritance of the array formation path. This was exactly what he lacked. If this had been a mid-level or higher array formation pagoda, Zong wouldn't have been able to understand it even if he had accepted the inheritance. After all, he lacked the foundation. As the array formation revolved, Zong immediately saw countless mysteries evolve before his eyes. Through a mysterious method, they were injected into his consciousness, as if they were about to form an imprint. Chapter 2242. The mysteries of the foundation of the Tao of Array constantly poured into Zong's mind like a flood that was about to burst. After all, although the foundation of the Tao of Array was called the foundation and seemed very simple, it wasn't simple at all. It was broad and profound, mysterious and boundless. Even with Zong's strong spirit, he felt that it was bloated and full. 3 intents at once. It consumed more energy than 2 intents at once, but it could maintain a certain recovery speed and not exhaust the power of the mind. After all, Zong did not forget that there were other cultivators, who knew if they would be unwillingly waiting for him to come out before attacking him. If that was the case, once the power of the mind was exhausted, it would be very disadvantageous for him. Under the 3 intents at once, coupled with his strong comprehension, one of them was used to sort out the fundamental mysteries of formation Tao that were pouring into his spirit, while the other 2 intents were used to comprehend. Combined with the superficial knowledge of formation Tao that Zong had mastered in the past, he quickly got started, comprehended, and improved at an astonishing speed. The existence of the Formation Tao Pagoda was naturally to pass on the secrets of Formation Tao to the disciples of the Great Void sect. Naturally, it would not purposely destroy a person's spirit. Therefore, even if it was a barbaric infusion, it would adjust itself according to the individual's condition. When there were signs of being unable to bear it, it would slow down. When the upper limit was reached, it would intensify. Zong's endurance was undoubtedly amazing, so the speed of the infusion was even more terrifying. As it poured in crazily, Zong continued to comprehend. If the Great Void sect was still around, this speed would definitely shock the entire sect. It took a few days for Zong to finish receiving the fundamental inheritance of Formation Tao. The surrounding light gradually dimmed and disappeared. At the same time, Zong opened his eyes. There seemed to be strands of light shuttling back and forth in his eyes, drawing the outline of a formation. While receiving the inheritance, Zong was also sorting out and comprehending at the same time. With his strong comprehension and high realm, he comprehended many mysteries. For a moment, Zong was confident that he could comprehend the 5th level of the Refining Void Seal in a short time. The Refining Void Seal was closely related to the mysteries of Formation Tao. Although it was also related to the mysteries of weapon forging, it was not that significant. With enough knowledge of Formation Tao, the effect was much better than having sufficient knowledge of weapon forging. Of course, if he could obtain the knowledge of weapon forging, it would be even better. Stepping out of the cornerstone of Formation Tao Inheritance, Chen Zong walked down the stairs. There was a person waiting on the second level of the low-level array formation pagoda. It seemed like he had gone through an intense battle and was the final victor. Upon seeing Chen Zong, that person's eyes flashed with a bright light, as though a raging fire was burning within him. However, he didn't act. After all, the inheritance wasn't a physical object. Even if he defeated his opponent, he wouldn't be able to take it away. Since this was the case, why waste time? Chen Zong did not make a move either. He went down to the first floor and walked out of the Formation Tao pagoda. Then, he heard a roar of anger and anger. This was because there was only one last Formation Tao inheritance left. After Chen Zong accepted it, there would be no replenishment from the Great Void Sect. Chen Zong could not help but feel lucky that he was one step faster. Next, I will need the basic inheritance of the weapon refining path and the intermediate star rank array path inheritance, Chen Zong thought to himself. Only by combining them would he be able to cultivate the Void Refining Seal to a higher level. The Refining Void Seal was one of the highest inheritances of the Great Void Sect. It was the essence of the Great Void Sect. The Refining Void Seal was divided into 36 levels and 12 realms. 3 levels made one realm. The 12th realm could only be comprehended and cultivated by mastering the Supreme Formation Tao Inheritance and the Supreme Weapon Tao Inheritance. From the 9th to the 11th realm, one needed the Supreme Formation Tao Inheritance and the Supreme Weapon Tao Inheritance as support. From the 6th to the 8th realm, one needed the Supreme Formation Tao Inheritance and the Supreme Weapon Tao Inheritance as support. From the 3rd to the 5th realm, one needed the Supreme Formation Tao Inheritance and the Supreme Weapon Tao Inheritance as support. From the 1st to the 3rd realm, one needed the Basic Formation Tao Inheritance and the Basic Weapon Tao Inheritance. Chen Zong had learned Weapon Tao before. Although it was not profound and he did not deliberately study it, it was not impossible to say that it was a Basic Weapon Tao Inheritance. Every realm was divided into 3 levels. In other words, after he thoroughly studied and comprehended the basic inheritance of the Array Tao, he could comprehend and cultivate the Void Refining Seal to the 9th level. As for the 10th level, it required a mid-grade star rank Array Tao Inheritance and a low-grade Equipment Tao Inheritance. These were all opportunities. Chen Zong could only try his best to obtain them. Sharpening a knife would not delay the work of cutting firewood. Chen Zong advanced while comprehending the basic Formation Tao Inheritance. Currently, he had comprehended 10% of the Formation Tao Inheritance. The remaining 90% would take some time. However, the basic Formation Tao Inheritance corresponded to the level below the Ascension Realm. For Chen Zong, who was at the Origin Underworld Realm and had a higher level of comprehension than the Origin Underworld Realm, it did not count at all. Chen Zong estimated that it would not be long before he completely comprehended and mastered the basic Formation Tao Inheritance. Advance, advance, advance. Although his combat strength did not increase, his horizons were constantly broadening and accumulating. When he arrived at the next ruin, Chen Zong saw a huge tree stump. The reason it was called a tree stump was because the tree had been destroyed by a terrifying power. Only the bottom section was left. Even though it was only a section, it was still shockingly huge. It was about 1,000 meters tall, but it was tens of thousands of meters wide. It was hard to imagine how tall the tree would have been if it had been whole. After all, the height of the tree was dozens of times higher than its width. Unfortunately, the battle back then had been too intense. Such a huge tree had also been destroyed, leaving only this 1,000-meter-tall tree stump. However, the tree was not completely destroyed. At the very least, with Chen Zong's powerful perception, he could sense that it still contained a bit of life force. However, the life force was not strong enough to completely revive the tree. It could only stay here and allow time to pass. After an unknown number of years, it would truly disappear. The world's sacred tree. Chen Zong sighed softly. This tree stump was left behind by the world's sacred tree. The world's sacred tree was a sacred tree that could only be born in some world. However, the Great Void sect was very powerful. They had found a sapling of the world's sacred tree in a world and transplanted it into the Great Void sect. They had specially constructed a large array to simulate the environment of the world so that the world's sacred tree could grow. The Great Void sect would also comprehend the mysteries of the formation Tao from the world's sacred tree. Of course, the fruit of the world's sacred tree also contained extraordinary power. It was a cultivation treasure. However, the world's sacred tree was only left with a stump. Its vitality was like a candle in the wind. Even it was slowly dying, let alone blossoming and bearing fruit. It was impossible to even think about it. After all, the array that simulated the world around the world's sacred tree had been destroyed. Chen Zong noticed that some cultivators were climbing up the tree stump. They seemed to be comprehending something. Chen Zong's figure flashed, and he rushed up the tree stump. This 1,000-meter tall and 10,000-meter wide tree stump was rough and uneven. It was filled with potholes. Some of the potholes were dozens of meters deep. Standing there, Chen Zong could feel traces of aura fluctuations through physical contact. It was the aura fluctuations of the world's sacred tree. It was very mysterious. After trying, Chen Zong realized that the aura he could feel in the potholes was stronger. He chose a pothole to enter and sat down cross-legged. Chen Zong began to feel the aura with all his might. Of course, he used the 3 intents of mind. One of his intents was to pay attention to the outside world to prevent being attacked, while the other was to comprehend the mysteries of the aura. The world's sacred tree contained the mysteries of the world. In short, when the world's sacred tree was born in a world, it carried the mysteries of that world. It was almost like the origin of the world. The two were closely related. Of course, the more powerful the world, the more powerful the world's sacred tree would be. However, at the same time, the more powerful the world, the lower the probability of the world's sacred tree being born. The probability of the world's sacred tree being born was already very small. Under even smaller circumstances, there was almost no hope. The black and white world was the original realm, but there was no world's sacred tree in it. Firstly, the black and white world was too strong. It was so strong that it was difficult for it to be born. Secondly, the black and white world was special. The black and white world was divided into 2. Under such circumstances, it was impossible for the world's sacred tree to be born. Otherwise, given the tyrannical black and white world, once the world's sacred tree was born, how amazing would it be? Under the 3 intents of mind, Chen Zong's comprehension efficiency was very high. Especially when Chen Zong came into contact with the remaining aura of the world's sacred tree, his own great path of the world was also stimulated. A buzzing sound rang out. Soon after, numerous illusory figures spread out from Chen Zong's body. Those illusory figures gradually condensed, transforming into a sky above and a land below. The sky was clear and the land was turbid. Within it, vegetation, forests, mountains, rivers, and even birds and beasts gradually appeared. This was Chen Zong's great path of the world. Strictly speaking, Chen Zong's study and mastery of the great path of the world were not as good as his heart sword principle. After all, Chen Zong had initially cultivated the sword and comprehended the sword principle. The great path of the world was only comprehended later. Furthermore, Chen Zong had been practicing the sword all this time. His growth in the sword principle would definitely surpass that of the great path of the world. However, comprehending the remaining aura of the world's sacred tree's stump had stimulated his own great path of the world. It was of great help to his comprehension of the great path of the world, just like comprehending the aura of the world origin. The world sacred tree had been nurtured by the Great Void Divine sect for many years and was constantly growing. It was comparable to the world sacred tree in the middle world. Even though it was only a remnant now, it was still very amazing. Other cultivators could also comprehend some of its mysteries. Of course, this was useful for Yuan Underworld and Dao Manipulation Realm cultivators, especially those in the Dao Manipulation Realm. The improvement would be more obvious. Yuan Underworld cultivators could also improve, but it was useless at the Divine Ability Realm unless it was a complete world sacred tree. Now, it was only a stump, not even 1,000th of its peak. Even the top Yuan Underworld cultivators would not have much effect, let alone the Divine Ability Realm. Chapter 2243. The sky, the earth, the trees, the grass, the stones, the mountains, the water droplets, the river, the ocean. Chen Zong saw a world unfold in front of him. The spring water flowed, the wind and clouds surged, and the sun shone brightly, illuminating the earth and everything. In an instant, dark clouds gathered and spread with the wind, covering the sky and the sun. It was so heavy that it became darker and heavier, as if it would collapse at any time. Rumble! An extremely oppressive sound suddenly exploded. It was the sound of thunder, rolling and vibrating endlessly, resounding throughout the world and shaking the clouds. Amidst the crackling sound, lightning suddenly wreaked havoc in the dark clouds like a dragon in the sea, and bean-sized raindrops fell from the sky. An incomparably huge thunderbolt struck down, directly bombarding a piece of land that was full of vitality, exploding a huge crater. Rainwater poured down, filling the crater and turning it into a pool. The sun rose and the moon set, and the moon rose and set, day after day, month after month, year after year. Gradually, the water level of the pool kept falling until it dried up. A sapling broke out of the ground, absorbing the spiritual power of the earth, the essence of the sun and the moon, and the vitality of the rain and dew, and slowly grew. As time passed, the sapling grew into a small sapling. A figure surrounded by runes descended. His face could not be seen clearly, but one could feel that the runes around him were extremely mysterious. They contained a terrifying power that seemed to have reached the level of a Dao Master. The Dao Master was very happy to see the sapling. The formation patterns spread out and covered it, digging up a large piece of land and taking it away. In the blink of an eye, the sapling was replanted, and a figure surrounded by formation patterns like a star circle, exuding monstrous power, surrounded it. With a wave of his hand, formation patterns scattered, and a large formation gradually took shape. Inside the large formation, it was as if heaven and earth had been opened. The top was clear and the bottom was turbid, and the power of the formation patterns condensed into the alternating sun and moon, the formation patterns condensed into the mighty wind and clouds, and the formation patterns condensed into the boundless earth, which quickly spread out. A world. It was actually evolving a world with the power of the formation. Countless formation patterns continued to condense and fall, and that world became more and more complete until it was completely complete. A figure exuding a terrifying aura stepped down from the sky and planted a sapling in the center of the formation world. In an instant, Chen Zong understood that this was the memory of the stump of the world divine tree, which was stimulated by his own great path of the world. This was also an opportunity that belonged to Chen Zong, because other cultivators who comprehended the great path of the world did not have such an opportunity, because they did not master of the great path of the world. The great path of the world and the world divine tree complemented each other. Chen Zong also did not expect that he would receive such an opportunity. The sapling from before should have been the very beginning of this world tree of God. It was born in a world. There were many ways to give birth to a world tree of God in a world, and what he saw was one of them. The Tao Master who was surrounded by formation patterns was the Tao Master of the Great Void Holy Sect. When he found the sapling of the World Divine Tree, he was very happy and took it back to the Great Void Holy Sect. The sovereigns and Tao sovereigns of the Great Void Holy Sect worked together to create a world of array formation. They planted the world tree of the world in it and merged it with the world created by the power of the array formation. Gradually, it grew stronger and stronger. Fully comprehending, the formation world was like a real world, with the sun rising and the moon setting, the cycle of the 4 seasons, the alternation of light and darkness, and the reincarnation of life and death. Chen Zong was like a bystander, but also like he was experiencing it himself. He felt as if he had integrated himself into the World Divine Tree, as if he had become the World Divine Tree, and was absorbing the essence of heaven and earth, the sun and the moon, step by step, to grow stronger. This was a kind of indescribable joy, a kind of moving feeling in life. It made Chen Zong feel incomparably moved, as if he was growing, as if he was constantly improving and breaking through in his cultivation. It was incomparably wonderful, and he was immersed in it, becoming deeper and deeper. Unknowingly, the World Divine Tree had grown to an astonishing level. Its trunk was tens of thousands of meters long, and it was millions of meters tall. It stood in the formation world, and became the center of the formation world. It had vast and mighty power, as if it was endless. However, this power was not lethal. In other words, the power of the World Divine Tree was the power of life. It was a mysterious power, and it did not have any direct attacking power. Many people from the Great Void Holy Sect would come here to comprehend the mysteries of the World Divine Tree, and to improve their formation skills. Some of the essence leaves of the World Divine Tree also contained extraordinary power. When the fruits were ripe, they would be plucked and become the cultivation treasures of the Great Void Holy Sect. Unknowingly, disaster struck. Tyrannical foreign tribes charged into the Great Void Holy Sect. These foreign tribes were huge and possessed terrifying power. They were all at the sovereign realm, and there were many at the Tao Lord level. Naturally, the Great Void Holy Sect resisted with all their might. Gradually, cultivators from other sect forces arrived. Destruction. Everything was destroyed. The foundation of the formation world began to be destroyed under the terrifying power. It was unstoppable. When the formation world was broken, the World Divine Tree was also revealed. It was discovered. The World Divine Tree was a treasure. However, in this fierce battle, where even the sovereign realm cultivators were involved, the World Divine Tree was also destroyed. Chen Zong could feel waves of intense pain sweeping over him, and he was on the verge of death. In the end, the World Divine Tree was broken. Its branches were taken away, and some were scattered everywhere. In the end, only a stump was left. Ruins. After a battle that lasted for hundreds of years, everything was turned into ruins. There were countless casualties. Through the memories of the World Divine Tree, Chen Zong saw countless cultivators fall in various places. Gradually, the battle ended, and everything returned to silence. This place changed from the Great Void Holy Sect to the Great Void Holy Ruins. It was isolated from the outside world by the space-time storm. The remaining power of the World Divine Tree began to decline because it could not be replenished. Although the rate of decline was slow, it was indeed declining. The domain that it could sense was also shrinking along with the decline of its power. Now, the range of the tree stump's perception was only a few pieces of ruins around it. Moreover, it was still declining. At this rate, the power of this stump of the World Divine Tree would be depleted in a few thousand years. It would be completely silent, and it would be equivalent to death. The growth of the World Divine Tree was very slow. Chen Zong felt that he had experienced an incomparably long period of time. That was because he had merged with the memories of the World Divine Tree. He had followed the experience of the World Divine Tree from its initial emergence as a seedling. Hundreds of thousands of years. Chen Zong estimated that it would take at least hundreds of thousands of years for the World Divine Tree to grow from a seedling to a height of 1,000,000 meters. However, that was not the end. The World Divine Tree could continue to grow. It could even reach a height of a few million meters. Unfortunately, in that great battle, the Great Void Holy Sect was destroyed. The World Divine Tree was also destroyed. The fact that it still had some power left proved that the World Divine Tree was tenacious. However, no matter how strong it was, it could not withstand the erosion of time in its broken state. Without the power of the outside world to replenish it, the World Divine Tree would eventually perish in the river of time. If there was power from the outside world to replenish it, even if it was in a broken state, there was hope that it could slowly recover. However, it was a pity that Chen Zong could not bring it away. Previously, when his consciousness merged with the memories of the World Divine Tree, it was almost as if they were one. There was an indescribable feeling. He could not bear to see the World Divine Tree die like this, but there was nothing he could do. Junior of the human clan, don't be sad for me. As if he was hallucinating, a weak voice sounded, startling Chen Zong. Junior of the human clan, don't be surprised. I am the spirit of the World Divine Tree. A second voice sounded, letting Chen Zong know the identity of the other party. The spirit of the World Divine Tree. As a natural World Divine Tree, it was not that simple. It had spirituality, and that spirituality would slowly strengthen until it finally gained consciousness. Unexpectedly, the spirit of the World Divine Tree was still alive. Chen Zong thought that it had been destroyed in that great battle. It seemed that it was not destroyed, but fell into a deep sleep because it was too weak. If it were not for Chen Zong's great path of the world, the spirit of the World Divine Tree would continue to sleep until it truly perished. But now it had been awakened. Even if it was awakened, it could not change the outcome of its eventual demise. Junior of the human clan, you have the aura of the world. The spirit of the World Divine Tree's weak voice sounded again. You and I are fated. Soon I will disappear completely. In the end, I can't escape death. Why don't I bestow the last of my power to you? The spirit of the World Divine Tree said. Its weak voice sounded a little more enlightened, like a wise old man who had weathered many hardships. Immediately, a strong force burst out from the World Divine Tree. The dozens of cultivators who were comprehending the mysteries of the tree stump could not resist the force. Under the impact of this force, they were immediately sent flying, almost flying out of the ruins. Rays of light shone, enveloping the whole tree stump. They were about to soar into the sky, but when they reached thousands of meters in the air, they suddenly stopped. Then, from all directions, they converged and fell to the center, like a waterfall falling from heaven. Not everyone on the tree stump was sent flying. There was still one person on the tree stump, and that was Chen Zong. Chen Zong received preferential treatment. The rays of light fell from the sky, and a force rushed up from below. In an instant, Chen Zong was suspended in the air, surrounded by two forces. The force kept pouring into Chen Zong's body. The shadow of the great path of the world around Chen Zong became more and more condensed, and gradually expanded. The last remaining force of the World Divine Tree did not improve Chen Zong's cultivation. Instead, it was integrated into Chen Zong's body, so that Chen Zong's future cultivation would be smoother, whether it was qi refining or body refining. Another benefit was that it could further improve Chen Zong's comprehension and mastery of the great path of the world, and he was constantly approaching the Heart Sword Way. Chapter 2244. The blackout didn't come until now. The power kept surging. Even though it was only the remaining power of the World Tree, which was less than 1/10,000th of its original power, it was still magnificent and vast. It should be noted that after hundreds of thousands of years of growth, the World Divine Tree was millions of meters tall. The power it contained was so vast that not even a Tao Master could compare with it. Even if it was less than 1/10,000th or even 100,000th, it was still amazing and extremely pure. Such power kept pouring in and being absorbed and refined by Chenzong. The mysteries contained in it were also comprehended by Chenzong. The accumulation of the great path of the world became more and more vigorous. Imperceptibly, Chenzong's mastery and application of the great path of the world improved. When all the power poured into Chenzong's body naturally floated down. Destined descendant of the human clan, I hope my last power will be useful to you. A weak voice sounded. At last, it became intermittent and finally returned to silence. Chenzong was silent. Then he whispered, "Thank you," although the spiritual deity of the World Tree could no longer hear him. A feeling of sadness lingered in Chenzong's heart. It was like strands of silk weaving back and forth, turning into a net of sadness that enveloped his heart. The resonance of the memory, as if the experience of incarnating into the World Tree, made Chenzong feel as if he had experienced it himself. Now, the World Tree gave him its last remaining power, which was enough to maintain its weak vitality for thousands of years. This gift was very heavy and very moving. The strong and vigorous power kept surging in his body, like waves rising and falling. Chenzong kept running his cultivation method and urging the power of the world divine body to refine this power. At the same time, he was comprehending the great path of the world under the dual mind realm. Damn it, it's him. It's him who got the remaining power of the World Tree. The cultivators who had been sent flying by the remaining power of the Tree of World were furious when they saw Chenzong appear. Originally, they had all been comprehending the mysteries of the World Tree, and they had gradually gained something. They had never thought that something would happen. They had been blasted away by a powerful force. Even though they were not injured, they had lost the opportunity to comprehend the World Tree. If everyone had been sent flying, it would have been fine. They would have waited until the force disappeared before trying again. Unexpectedly, there was still one person left on the tree stump. They immediately thought that the matter of them being sent flying was most likely caused by this person, or at least related to this person. His anger flared. In an instant, they attacked one after another, blasting out astonishing attacks. Many of these people had a Yuan underworld cultivation base. Initial and mid-level Yuan underworld cultivation bases were very powerful when they attacked. In the blink of an eye, more than a dozen powerful attacks came from all directions, as if they were going to smash Chenzong into pieces. When it came to opportunities, one had to fight for them. However, when the opportunity was gone, some people would rationally choose to retreat and search for other opportunities. Some people were different. They would only give up after venting the anger in their hearts. The dozen or so attacks were not weak. However, when these attacks bombarded Chenzong's body, their speed kept decreasing. When they were about 1 meter away from Chenzong, they all came to a stop. It was as if time and space were frozen, and they stopped in mid-air. Break! Chenzong softly spat out a single word. It was as if his words were a law. The dozen or so powerful attacks that had been frozen were instantly shattered like porcelain that had been violently smashed. The dozen or so attacks were of different colors. After they shattered, they looked like petals dancing in the sky. There was an indescribable brilliance. Just nice. I'll use you guys to test my new power. Chenzong took a step forward. With a bang, layers of ripples surged out in the void. It was as if Chenzong wasn't stepping on air, but on water. Layers of invisible ripples appeared on the surface of the water. His next step seemed to travel through time and space as he rushed into the midst of the Yuan underworld cultivators that had attacked. Suppress. As Chenzong said that word, an extremely terrifying pressure descended. Vaguely, there seemed to be a roaring sound in the void. Indistinct shadows appeared one after another, like the sky, the scorching sun, the wind, the clouds, the earth, the mountains, the forest, the vast ocean, the long river. This was like a miniature world. It was very faint and almost undetectable. However, if one looked closely, they would be able to see some traces of it. The Yuan underworld cultivators' expressions changed drastically. They were horrified to discover that they had been suppressed by a vast and mysterious power. For a moment, they were actually unable to move. Domain. They could sense that this was the power of a domain, but they couldn't sense what kind of domain it was. Sword light suddenly flickered as a sword swept across the sky and merged with this suppressive domain. There was nowhere to hide and no way to resist. Since they had attacked him so viciously, Chen Zong naturally wouldn't show any mercy. Wherever his sword passed, there was no way to resist and they were all killed. The sword didn't return to its scabbard. Instead, it became one with the sword and attacked the others. Kill, kill, kill. He didn't let anyone who had attacked him go, regardless of which faction they were from or whether they were unaffiliated cultivators. The dozen or so people were unable to put up any resistance. They were first suppressed and then killed. Chen Zong hadn't expended much energy during the entire process. The others were pale and drenched in cold sweat as they hurriedly fled. Chen Zong didn't give chase because these people hadn't attacked him. As he allowed these people to leave, Chen Zong felt a wave of excitement in his heart that was difficult to calm down, and it was like the surging waves of a river. The World Sacred Tree's final gift was to give its remaining power to Chen Zong. To the World Sacred Tree, this power was insignificant when it was at its peak. However, it was a metamorphosis for Chen Zong. Really, it was a metamorphosis. In terms of qi cultivation and body tempering, he had already reached the peak of the initial Yuan underworld and the peak of the initial divine body tempering. He had saved at least a few decades of cultivation effort. It wasn't easy to raise one's cultivation base at the Yuan underworld level. There were some differences even in the initial stages. Some people had just entered the initial stages, while others had been in the initial stages for hundreds of years. Their accumulations would definitely be relatively more robust. With Chen Zong's cultivation speed, if he wanted to reach the peak of the beginner stage in both qi cultivation and body refining, he would need a few decades of cultivation under normal circumstances. But now, he had saved a few decades of time and reached the peak of the beginner stage. He was only a step away from the intermediate stage. Although cultivation base wasn't the entirety of combat power and was only a small part of it, an increase in cultivation base would still have an effect on combat power. However, cultivation base wasn't the main point, as it was only a side effect. The main point was the World Great Path. The power of the World Sacred Tree was extremely mysterious and contained the mysteries of the world. If other cultivators were to comprehend it, they would be able to comprehend some mysteries of the Great Path and improve their Great Path. After all, the Great Path origin of the world was equivalent to a weakened version of the Void Great Path origin. Although the world origin couldn't be compared to the Void origin in essence, they were ultimately of the same origin. Chen Zong had mastered the World Great Path, which was close to the world origin. The final power of the World Sacred Tree was more than 100 times more useful to Chen Zong than to others. This directly allowed Chen Zong's comprehension and mastery of the World Great Path to reach an astonishing level. If the World Great Path that Chen Zong had previously mastered was just a facade, then the current World Great Path had a foundation and a core, which was the final origin of the World Sacred Tree. Although the realm of the World Great Path hadn't increased, its essence had strengthened. After the strengthening, Chen Zong had mastered the World Great Path domain. The Sword Dao domain originated from the Heart Sword Dao that Chen Zong had comprehended and mastered. Any ascending spirit powerhouse would master a domain. The only difference was the speed at which they mastered it. The powerful ones could master a domain at the Dao manipulation realm, the good ones could master a domain at the Yuanming realm, and the ordinary ones could master a domain at the transcendent realm. In the end, the so-called domain was a kind of understanding and mastery of the Great Path that one had mastered. Regardless of the level of one's cultivation, as long as one had a thorough understanding of the Great Path that they had mastered, they could activate a Great Path domain. In short, every ascending spirit could only master one type of Great Path domain because they could only master one type of Great Path. Chernzong had already mastered the Sword Dao domain, which originated from the Heart Sword Dao. However, the World Great Path hadn't activated a Great Path domain. It had always lacked something. Only now did Chernzong understand that he hadn't touched upon the deeper mysteries of the World Great Path. Now, with the gift of the World Sacred Tree, he had obtained the final bit of origin. Even if it was just a trivial bit of origin, it had become a catalyst that allowed Chernzong to truly master his own World Great Path. That bit of origin was actually nothing to Chernzong, but it was like a key that opened a door. The feeling inside the door was completely different from the outside. World Domain. The domain of the World Great Path. Once it was mastered, it improved rapidly. Originally, Chernzong's accumulation of the World Great Path was very strong. The only difference was that it wasn't thorough enough. Now, not only had he mastered it thoroughly, but with the help of the World Sacred Tree, his domain had surpassed the Sword Dao domain and reached 6,000 meters. Sword Dao domain, 5,000 meters. World domain, 6,000 meters. One person had 2 Great Path domains. How amazing was that? After mastering 2 Great Path domains, Chernzong suddenly had an idea in his heart. Just by thinking about it, Chernzong knew that it was very difficult. He wasn't confident that he could do it. However, this was the only way to be challenging, wasn't it? Cultivation was to challenge all kinds of difficulties and go against the flow. If everything went smoothly, it would be too boring after a long time. The storage rings of more than a dozen people who had been killed were all taken away by Chernzong. There was no one left. Chernzong looked back at the dried-up stump that had lost its last bit of vitality. He looked a little lonely. After all, he seemed to have experienced many years in a short period of time. It was as if he had become a sacred tree that had experienced wind and rain. There was an indescribable feeling that was very profound. After exhaling a long breath, Chernzong waved his hand. The purple star dragon flame turned into a fire dragon and appeared. After absorbing some of the flames, the purple universe star dragon flame was slowly transforming. Its power had become even stronger. Ignite. Chapter 2245. The blazing fire burned fiercely, and the light of the fire shone in all directions. An incomparably hot aura continued to spread. The flame was at least tens of thousands of meters tall, and it soared into the sky. It was incomparably huge and extremely shocking. Chernzong stood outside the flame and said nothing. To be honest, even if the tree stump of the World Tree had completely lost its vitality and was only left with a piece of wood, it was still a treasure. After all, it was the stump of the World Tree, not an ordinary tree stump. Chernzong could have taken it away, but he did not do so. Instead, he set it on fire and burned it until it was burned to ashes. Just like that, it was buried. The World Tree had sprouted from the ground, grew strong, and finally was destroyed. It had given its remaining vitality to Chernzong. It was like an elder worthy of his respect. Since that was the case, he had to let it go on its way with peace of mind. Burn. It was buried in the fire. Without a doubt, this incomparably huge flame that was as vigorous as a mountain attracted the attention of others. After all, such a huge flame was incomparably conspicuous and eye-catching. Everyone in the surrounding ruins could see it and feel the astonishing heat. Some people could not help but rush over to see if there were any treasures. In the end, they found that there were no treasures, only a section of the stump that had been set on fire and was burning. They left in disappointment. Chernzong did not pay any attention to it. Only when the flames were extinguished and the huge tree stump was burned to ashes did he wave his hand. A gust of wind whistled out. It was extremely violent as it swept out. The gust of wind contained countless sword chi. When it landed on the charred tree stump, it immediately shattered into powder and drifted away with the wind. Dissipate. It dissipated like smoke and scattered like dust. Born from the earth and returned to the earth. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. When his voice faded away like dust, Chern Zong's body floated into the distance. The huge tree stump on the ground of the ruins had already disappeared without a trace. There was only a huge charred mark that proved something. The tree of world disappeared. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. But it did not disappear, because the last of its inheritance was with Chern Zong. It had fused with Chern Zong's spirit and became a continuation. As Chern Zong flew, he constructed a map model of the Great Void Divine Ruins in his Divine Sea. This was what he saw when he merged the memories of the World Tree of the Divine World. The destruction of the Great Void Holy Gate and its transformation into the Great Void Divine Ruins were all under the World God Tree's perception. Although the World God Tree had been destroyed back then and only a stump remained, the Spirit God did not fall into a deep slumber. She could still sense the entire ruins of God. However, as time passed, the World God Tree's vitality and power slowly declined as it could not be replenished. The range of its senses also constantly shrank. In the end, the Spirit God fell into a deep slumber, and her senses instinctively covered the surrounding ruins. At its peak, the World God Tree's perception range was more than 10 times that of the Great Void Sect. Chern Zong's great path of the world resonated with the World God Tree and fused with it. It was as if he had transformed into the World God Tree and obtained some of its memories. Everything that the World God Tree sensed about the Great Void Divine Ruins was shared with Chern Zong. In other words, not only did Chern Zong know how many ruins there were in the Great Void Divine Ruins, but he also knew the distribution of each ruin. In fact, the World God Tree had also sensed the Great Battle back then. It had also sensed where some of the treasures ended up. That meant that Chern Zong also knew. This would be of great help to Chern Zong in his search for the 3 divine treasures of the Great Void. It was as if the World God Tree had provided him with a very accurate map. Not long after, Chern Zong used his own divine thought to construct a detailed map in his Spirit Sea. It was a complete map of the Great Void Divine Ruins. It was not flat, but 3-dimensional and lifelike. It was as if the Great Void Divine Ruins had been directly projected into Chern Zong's Spirit Sea. Immediately after, Chern Zong used his divine thought to mark out his location. He also marked out the final locations of the 3 divine treasures of the Great Void, as well as some treasures and inheritances. He also planned out the shortest and most time-saving route for himself: cheating. It was as if Chern Zong had turned on a cheating device. This was the 3rd benefit of meeting the World God Tree. In the past, the Great Void Divine Ruins had been opened many times, dozens of times, almost 100 times. However, no one had ever achieved this and obtained such benefits because they had not comprehended the great path of the world. Except for Chern Zong. The 3 divine treasures of the Great Void are the Void-Shattering Mirror, the Great Void Thunderous Robe, and the Heavenly Void World-Suppressing Pagoda. Chern Zong thought to himself as he hurried along. He already knew this information. After all, the 3 divine treasures of the Great Void were very famous. He even knew the effects of the 3 divine treasures of the Great Void. The Shattering Void Mirror was a divine tool mainly used for attacking. Once it was activated, the Shattering Void Mirror's light would shoot out, and its might would be extremely terrifying. Destroying a star was a trivial matter, and shattering a world was nothing. Even if a Dominator-level powerhouse was struck by it, they would be injured. That's right. When the Void-Shattering Mirror was fully activated, its power was enough to injure a Sovereign Realm elite. Of course, it was not that easy to activate such a terrifying divine artifact. As for the Great Void Thunderous Robe, it could activate the Great Path of Lightning domain. In other words, after obtaining and refining the Great Void Thunderous Robe, one could master the Great Path of Lightning domain. A mighty prowess cultivator could only master one Great Path domain. It was only possible if, like Chen Zong, both his qi and body cultivation had broken through to the Dao manipulation realm. Moreover, they had to break through to the Yuanming realm. However, if one obtained the Great Void Thunderous Robe, they could master one more Great Path domain, which was the Great Path of Lightning. It was said that the Great Path of Lightning could be overlapped with the Great Path that one had mastered, and its power would be even stronger. If one cultivated the Great Path of Lightning and also mastered a Great Path of Lightning, then the amplification after overlapping would be even more astonishing. Those who had yet to master a Great Path domain would be able to master a Great Path domain directly after obtaining the Thunderous Taishi Robe. Those who had mastered a Great Path domain would be able to master an additional Great Path domain. Those who had mastered a Great Path domain of the Thunder lineage would be able to make their own Great Path domain even stronger after overlapping. Moreover, the stronger one was, the stronger the Great Void Thunderous Robe's Great Path domain would be. If a sovereign obtained the Great Void Thunderous Robe, then the Great Path domain's power would also reach the sovereign realm. Finally, the Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda's power was different from the Void Shattering Mirror and the Great Void Thunderous Robe. After all, the Void Shattering Mirror's attack power was very strong, but it could only attack in a straight line. Normally, if it attacked an expert, it could only attack one target. If it still had energy left, it could attack other targets in a straight line, but it was still limited. The Great Void Thunderous Robe was a supreme treasure that could activate the Great Path domain. Its power could be strong or weak. When it was strong, it could reach the sovereign realm, and when it was weak, it could only reach the Dao controlling realm. Everything depended on one's ability. The Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda was a strategic divine artifact. It had nothing to do with one's cultivation level. Once it was activated, it could directly cover a certain area and form a suppressive force. Under the suppressive force, even a sovereign realm expert would be weakened by several %. This was the first power of the Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda. The second power was to absorb living beings into the pagoda. Ordinary cultivators did not understand, but the upper echelons of holy lands like the Will Heavenly Palace knew that if they were sucked into the Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda, all their cultivation power would disappear. No, it should not really disappear, but be suppressed and could not be used. What it had was only ordinary power, as if it had been reduced to an ordinary person. As such, it would be impossible to use one's own power to attack the Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda. It would be impossible to break the suppressive shackles and escape the pagoda. It could be said that the Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda was the most powerful of the three divine artifacts of the Great Void. Chen Zong was heading in the direction of the Great Void Thunderous Robe, one of the three divine artifacts. This was the sensory memory of the World Divine Tree. As for whether it was accurate or not, Chen Zong did not dare to be 100% sure. After all, so many years had passed. However, he was at least 70% or 80% sure. 3 pieces. His position and the possible position of the Great Void Thunderous Robe were about the same distance away from the 3 pieces of ruins. The ruins of the Great Void Divine Ruins were very strange. They seemed to be continuously distributed from the outside to the inside, but there was also a sense of crisscrossing left and right. It was as if one could reach the innermost area by going in a straight line from the outermost area. However, this was not the case. One might think that one was going in a straight line, but one might unknowingly deviate from the direction. Previously, Chen Zong had thought that he was going in a straight line. Logically speaking, no matter how big the Great Void Divine Ruins was, there were only tens of thousands of pieces of ruins. If he were to go from the outermost area to the innermost area, based on the dozens of pieces of ruins that he had passed, he should have entered the center. At the very least, he should be close to the innermost area. However, this was not the case. It was only when Chen Zong used the memory of the World Divine Tree to create a miniature of the Great Void Divine Ruins in his Spirit Sea that he realized that what he thought was going in a straight line was actually slowly deviating. However, now, with the memory of the World Divine Tree and the miniature of the Great Void Divine Ruins in his Spirit Sea, it was very detailed and lifelike. It was like a direct projection of the Great Void Divine Ruins, and could be called a living map. Chen Zong had an accurate guide, and would not lose his way unknowingly. With a goal and even more motivation, Chen Zong felt that his entire body was filled with energy, as if he had endless energy. Chen Zong did not stop at any of the 3 pieces of ruins. He used his divine will to sweep through them. If he discovered any treasures, he would make a move. However, there were cultivators on each piece of ruins. There were more than one, and they were all looking for the so-called opportunities and treasures. There were even divinity realm cultivators. Under the circumstances where they did not discover any treasures, divinity realm cultivators would not make a move recklessly. This was because if they made a move against someone weaker, they would not be defeated by someone stronger. Of course, if they encountered treasures that interested them, they would definitely make a move. Otherwise, what was the point of coming here? It was better to stay in their own territory and cultivate. There was no need to take such risks. Chapter 2246. The sword radiance flew across the sky and quickly passed through the dark area before landing on a piece of ruined land. Chen Zong released his divine consciousness and started searching. According to the memory left behind by the World God Tree, the final location of the Great Void Thunderous Robe was most likely in this piece of ruined land. However, this piece of ruined land was not small and the Great Void Thunderous Robe was not a big target. Without releasing any aura, it was like looking for a needle in a haystack. However, he had an advantage. Since he was 70 to 80% sure that the Great Void Thunderous Robe was here, he had to search with all his might. Chen Zong did not care about other opportunities for now. As long as he could find the Great Void Thunderous Robe and bring it back to the Heavenly Intention Palace, he would have passed the Taoist assessment and become the Taoist of the Heavenly Intention Palace. He was now the 3rd Taoist. He released his divine consciousness and his eyes were sharp. The world territory was also activated and covered an area of 6,000 meters. 6,000 meters was a range of 12 miles. It was not small and increased Chen Zong's search efficiency. There were other cultivators who entered this piece of ruined land and were also searching for treasures and opportunities. However, they did not have a clear target like Chen Zong and were trying their luck. Time passed by slowly. Chen Zong was practically searching every inch of the area. The other cultivators didn't do the same. Instead, they quickly searched the area. If they found any treasures, they would take action. If they didn't find anything, they would leave immediately. The Great Void Ruins was huge, and there were many opportunities. It was not worthwhile to stay in one place unless they were sure that there was a great opportunity. Otherwise, they had to search quickly. If they could find something, they would. If they could not find it, they would leave quickly and go to other pieces of ruined land. Otherwise, it would be a waste of time. People came and went in shift. Chen Zong was the only one who was still searching. He had already searched half of the ruined land, but still could not find the Great Void Thunderous Robe. In front of him, there were sounds of intense collisions. Someone was fighting and seemed to be fighting for some treasure. Chen Zong looked and saw that the treasure was not the Great Void Thunderous Robe. It was very simple. The Void Thunderclap robe was a robe that could be worn. Chen Zong didn't know the 2 parties involved in the battle, so he naturally wouldn't interfere. Both of them weren't weak, they were probably at the top of the 5-star level. It was very intense, and they were fighting with all their might. The collision of the tyrannical power immediately caused severe damage to the surroundings. The ground of the ruins was extremely hard, but it was still unable to withstand the bombardment of such power. Dust flew everywhere, and countless rocks and other objects were sent flying in all directions by the terrifying power. As Chen Zong looked around, his eyes suddenly lit up. He saw a piece of black cloth on the ground, covered with silver veins. He reached out and grabbed it, then shook it. Instantly, the soil was shaken off. Chen Zong's eyes flickered as he looked around. It's completely black with silver lightning patterns. It's a formation of the great Tao of thunder. Could this be the void thunder-shocking robe? Chen Zong looked at the old robe in his hand and couldn't help but get excited. He didn't expect that after searching for so long, the void thunder-shocking robe would appear because of the destruction caused by the battle. Originally, the void thunder-shocking robe should have been buried under the ruins. In fact, there were some treasures that were buried under the ruins. However, under normal circumstances, no one would deliberately bombard the ground of the ruins. That method was not certain if one would be able to obtain anything. Moreover, it would waste one's strength for no reason. In the Great Void Divine Ruins, where the aura was chaotic and difficult to replenish, it was very important to preserve one's own power. Although it could be replenished with elixirs, it would take some time. If one took too much, it would cause one's power to become less pure. The two parties involved in the battle didn't use their full strength. They only used about 80% of their power. They were constantly paying attention to their surroundings. When they saw Chen Zong pull out a black robe from the ground, it was covered with silver lightning patterns. It seemed to be something extraordinary. The two of them seemed to have a tacit understanding and stopped fighting. In the next moment, the two of them immediately rushed towards Chen Zong. They were extremely fast and flanked him from both sides. Their target was the robe in Chen Zong's hand. Of course, they didn't recognize what treasure it was. They only thought that since it was taken out from the ruins, it must be a treasure. No matter what it was, they would think about it after they got their hands on it. Attack! In an instant, a solid fist print rushed towards Chen Zong like a moving mountain. It carried an extremely terrifying power and directly blasted towards him. On the other hand, the cultivator on the other side struck out with his palm. The palm print condensed and burned with a blazing flame, emitting a dazzling firelight. The combined attack of the fist and palm had the power of a 6-star level. It was extremely powerful and brought great pressure to Chen Zong. Extreme lightning. In just an instant, Chen Zong turned into a bolt of lightning and flew backwards to avoid the fist and palm. The sword radiance suddenly shone. He swung his sword, and the sword radiance was like a scroll that was quickly unfolding. Lingwu's Supreme Technique. 11 Levels of Flame of Heart. Great World Sword Technique. Boundless Earth. This sword was not integrated with the power of the sword principal domain, but the power of the world domain. The heart-refining sword technique was suitable for the sword principal domain. The Great World Sword Technique had been driven by the sword principal domain before. However, since he had mastered the world domain, Chen Zong instinctively felt that the world domain was the most suitable power for the Great World Sword Technique. As soon as he swung his sword, the two of them were immediately swept up by the boundless earth and enveloped in it. Suppress. The Great World Sword Technique under the world domain's suppression power was pushed to the extreme. The two 6-star experts were suppressed by this sword and couldn't escape for a while. However, the two of them were very decisive. They immediately activated their secret techniques and erupted. Their combat strength surged and they attacked wildly. The power of the Taichu Sword Origin Body. Heart-refining sword technique. Sword 4. He raised his sword to his eyebrows. The sword radiance broke through the air and condensed a sword principal domain that was 5,000 meters wide. It turned into the most powerful sword radiance and pierced through the sky. The extremely condensed sword radiance was so bright that the two of them couldn't look directly at it. A strong sense of crisis surged in their hearts. They couldn't block it. This sword couldn't be blocked at all. It had reached the combat strength of a 6-star expert. The terrifying power of the Taichu sword origin was enough to tear through everything. However, the two of them were 6-star experts after all. Although they were pierced through, they didn't die. Instead, they unleashed their full power and escaped from the suppression of the boundless earth. The cultivator on the left took out a round mirror. There were cracks on the surface of the mirror. He activated it right away. In an instant, a terrifying beam of light blasted out. It exploded with shocking power and blasted directly at Chen Zong. The cultivator on the right also took out a strong crossbow and pulled the trigger. A ray of light arrow that was as thick as a finger shot out. It seemed to be able to pierce through everything. Formation artifact. The two of them were using formation artifact. The power that was unleashed in an instant was extremely powerful. It directly reached the combat strength of a top 6-star expert. The threat that it brought to Chen Zong was even greater. However, Chen Zong's combat strength could also reach the combat strength of a top 6-star expert when he unleashed his full power. He swung his sword and the sword radiance shot out. 4/10. The 4 sword radiances split up and attacked in 2 directions. The power of each sword radiance was extremely terrifying. It could pierce through everything and was unstoppable. 2 of the sword radiances collided with the attacks of the 2 formation artifact. They paused for a moment and exploded with terrifying power. The other 2 sword radiances shot towards the 2 cultivators. This time, it was a fatal blow. The 2 cultivators were pierced through between their eyebrows. Their eyes were filled with shock. Then, 2 tiny figures appeared above their heads and flew away at a shocking speed. Primordial Spirit. Chen Zong's attack was powerful, but the 2 cultivators weren't weak either. Their primordial spirits weren't destroyed. Instead, they took the opportunity to escape from their bodies. However, their primordial spirits were also attacked by Chen Zong's sword chi. They were more or less injured. The 2 primordial spirits were too fast. Chen Zong couldn't chase after them. After all, without a body, the primordial spirit's speed would be several times faster than the body's speed. However, in such a place, the injured primordial spirits wouldn't be able to hold on for long. If there were no accidents, they would quickly weaken and eventually die. Only the primordial spirits of Transcendent Realm cultivators could survive for a longer time after leaving their bodies. Yuan Underworld Realm cultivators didn't have this ability. With a wave of his hand, Chen Zong put away the 2 cultivators' storage rings. Naturally, the formation artifacts they used were also taken by Chen Zong. This should be a replica of the void-shattering mirror, Chen Zong said to himself. There were replicas of the 3 great void divine tools. However, the void-shattering mirror was the most common, followed by the great void thunderous robe. As for the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda, it was the least common because it was too difficult to copy. Previously, he had also obtained a broken bronze mirror, which was also a replica of the void-shattering mirror. Could the robe in my hand also be a replica? Chen Zong suddenly thought of something. Some replicas were very clever, to the extent that they could pass off as genuine. After the World Divine Tree was destroyed, it was possible that there would be some deviation in perception. Regardless of whether it was a replica or not, he would take it first. When Chen Zong planned to put the Great Void Thunderous Robe into the 9 heavenly rings, a sudden change occurred. With a boom, it was as if heaven and earth were shaking. Electric light constantly diffused from the robe, turning into bolts of lightning that wreaked havoc. Lightning! Lightning surged. Lightning wreaked havoc like a tidal wave, one after another. It was a silver-white lightning that was dazzling and resplendent. Numerous bolts of lightning crisscrossed in the air. Some were as thick as a finger, some were as thick as an arm, and some were as thick as a thigh. Regardless of whether they were thick or thin, every single bolt of lightning contained an extremely terrifying might that seemed capable of destroying everything. An aura that caused one's heart to palpitate ceaselessly spread out like a raging tide. In just a few short breaths, this silver-white lightning directly covered half of the ruins, turning into a lightning domain. Looking at it from afar, it made one's heart palpitate. What a shocking power of lightning! There must be a great treasure. An expert approached and felt the shocking power of lightning. He immediately revealed a smile. His figure flashed and power filled his body. He plunged into the lightning and disappeared, as if he had been swallowed. He was not the only one who entered the vast lightning. All the cultivators who came to this ruins either did so without hesitation or after thinking for a while. Wealth was found in danger. If one wanted to obtain a fortuitous encounter, one had to dare to take risks and wait for a fortuitous encounter. Unless one was a person with heaven-defying luck, it would be wishful thinking. Only a few people with heaven-defying luck had appeared since ancient times. They were extremely rare. Chapter 2247. Within the field of lightning, Chen Zong was dumbfounded. This turn of events was completely out of his expectations, and he was caught off guard. He had only intended to take the thunderous cosmos robe, and did not expect such an unexpected turn of events. Now, the robe was constantly releasing a terrifying power of lightning. Chen Zong could not get close to it, because the power was too strong, and it was beyond his limit. Chen Zong did not know whether to laugh or cry. Since it had come to this, he would try to take it directly. He only needed to take the first step. The refining void seal. He quickly formed a seal with both hands, and once again, it blasted into the lightning. Again, something strange happened. As if stimulated by the refining void seal, the lightning that burst out from the Taishu thunderous robe became even more intense. As Chen Zong's refining void seal fell one after another, the Taishu thunderous robe finally seemed to disappear and turned into a ball of blazing lightning. Finally, Chen Zong's refining void seal was like a stone sinking into the sea. Chen Zong withdrew even further. The lightning was too hot, and the pressure was too strong at such a close distance. This power belonged to the power of the great void thunderous robe. Chen Zong's goal was to draw it out and let it release as much as he wanted. Without any replenishment, this power would not last for long. As long as the power of the great void thunderous robe was exhausted, he would be able to retrieve it. As for causing too much of a commotion and attracting others, there was nothing he could do about it. After all, things were not under his control. It seemed that this robe was very likely to be the real thunderous cosmos robe, and not a replica. At this moment, the first figure rushed into the lightning and quickly approached. His eyes swept across, and Chen Zong immediately tensed up, and his hair stood on end. The Transcendent Realm. This was a Transcendent Realm expert. Chen Zong could not help but feel his heart sink. If a Transcendent Realm expert was attracted here, did it mean that he had no chance to get the robe? After all, he lacked the ability to compete with a Transcendent Realm expert. This was the difference in combat strength. Someone from the Heavenly Will Palace. The Divine Tier Elite glanced at Chen Zong and saw the emblems on Chen Zong's robe. "Since I'm here, this is mine. Don't make a mistake." Those words sounded polite, but there was also a clear hint of warning in them. Out of consideration for the Heavenly Will Palace, Zhang Xian was advising Chen Zong to back down, or else he might just lose his life. In most cases, no one dared to casually kill the true disciples of the Holy Lands. After all, the Holy Lands had astonishing methods and might be able to track them down. At that time, when the powerhouses were dispatched, where could they run to? If they were in the void, it would be very difficult to escape unless they escaped to the outer realm. However, that was the territory of the outsiders, and it was also very dangerous. Therefore, as a last resort, the people from the major powers would try their best not to kill them or make them their enemies. Of course, if his family background was also very high, he wouldn't have so many taboos. The Divine Tier Elite's background was relatively ordinary compared to the Holy Lands, so he naturally wasn't willing to make a move on Chernzong. However, if Chernzong didn't know what was good for him, he would still have to kill him for the sake of the treasure. As for the future, he would think about it later. Chernzong thought about it and retreated. He wasn't a match for a Transcendent Realm expert. The other party only needed one move to suppress and kill him. Even if he used all his strength, it would be useless. That was an absolute difference. After all, he was only at the initial stage of the Origin Underworld realm. No matter how strong his combat strength was, it was only at the peak of the 6-star realm. Clamor, rage, or talk tough. It was meaningless. Seeing Chernzong retreat so decisively without any hesitation or talk tough, the Divine Tier Elite didn't pay any more attention to him. His attention was completely attracted by the ball of blazing lightning in front of him. What an astonishing power of lightning! If I can collect it! The Divine Tier Elite's eyes blazed with an incomparably astonishing passion, as if flames were burning. Soon after, his power exploded. He opened his hands and grabbed, turning them into huge palms that were covered with shocking power. He grabbed the ball of blazing lightning. He did not know what was inside the ball of lightning. However, a lightning power that could release such astonishing power was definitely not to be underestimated. The palm formed by the Divine Tier power caught the ball of lightning but didn't manage to grab it immediately. Instead, it was destroyed by the terrifying lightning. How powerful! The Divine Tier Elite was shocked. Withdraw your claws. A violent shout suddenly sounded, accompanied by an incomparably blazing aura that swept over. It was like a violent stream of flames that bombarded the dike. It was incomparably violent. The Divine Tier Elite was shocked. His expression changed drastically as he hurriedly dodged. You're from the Omni-Tribulation Divine Flame Mountain. I found this treasure first. The Divine Tier Elite's expression turned grave when he saw who it was. His eyes narrowed slightly as he spoke in a deep voice, as if he was going to argue with reason. Scram! The Divine Tier Elite from the Omni-Tribulation Divine Flame Mountain didn't intend to argue with the other party. He was extremely overbearing and rude as he directly told the other party to scram. At the same time, his eyes were filled with anger. Raging flames surged into the sky and intertwined with the lightning. You! The Divine Tier Elite relied on his cultivation base and felt that he wasn't inferior to the other party. He wanted to speak again. With a boom, the Divine Tier Elite from the Omni-Tribulation Divine Flame Mountain attacked. One palm. With just a lift of his palm, a dazzling scarlet flame immediately burned on his palm, causing his entire palm to turn into a flaming palm. It emanated an extremely terrifying power as it blasted out. Natal superpower. The Divine Tier Elite in the black robe was shocked. He immediately activated his own power and his natal superpower. He turned into a ray of black light that pierced through the sky. A Divinity Realm powerhouse's natal mystique was much more powerful and shocking than other mystique. The two natal superpowers instantly collided. The Divine Tier Elite from the Omni-Tribulation Divine Flame Mountain's Divine Tier superpower was stronger. It directly destroyed the black light of his opponent's Divine Tier superpower. The flaming palm print was like the hand of a fire god as it blasted towards the Divine Tier Elite in the black robe, shattering his defensive power. However, his natal superpower wasn't useless. At least it blocked a portion of the power of his opponent's flaming palm print. He was sent flying, but he borrowed the force to retreat. He wasn't seriously injured. Chernzong was very decisive. When he left, he didn't think that he would be lucky enough to stay. No matter what, a Divine Tier Elite wasn't someone he could fight against. Since that was the case, he would leave quickly. Even if he had some regrets, there were 3 great void divine treasures. Other than the great void thunderous robe, there was also the void shattering mirror and the most important heavenly void world suppressing pagoda. They were all worth fighting for. On a piece of ruined land there were ruins everywhere. Broken walls and many weapons were scattered around. They were all divine treasures. However, because they were damaged in the battle, and because the great void divine ruins was sealed, they couldn't receive the nourishment of the outside world's chi of vitality. In the end, they perished and became scrap metal. In the distance, a violent and powerful aura of thunder exploded. It spread in all directions and shook the surroundings. In an instant, a dusty mirror that looked like a piece of scrap metal shook. Cracks appeared on it, and in the next breath, it exploded. Then, a bright light shone out. The light was a faint black that was almost transparent. There was an ethereal aura fluctuation, but it also contained an extremely terrifying aura. It seemed to be able to penetrate and destroy everything. As the light spread out, the models on the ancient mirror gradually fell off, revealing its exquisite and simple body. The faint, almost black light gathered and turned into a beam that was as thick as a thigh. It shot up into the sky as if it could pierce through the 9 heavens and shatter the heavens. It was like a beam of light that broke through the void. This is, the void-shattering mirror has appeared. The knowledgeable cultivators saw the beam of light that shot up into the sky from afar. They felt the aura that seemed to break through the heavens. They were stunned and immediately became happy. The void-shattering mirror, one of the 3 divine treasures of the Great Void, had appeared. When the power of the Great Void thunderous robe erupted, and when the shattering void mirror sensed the power of the Great Void thunderous robe and erupted with its own shattering void power, releasing the shattering void light, in the innermost region of the Great Void divine ruins, in other words, in the ruins adjacent to the centermost region of the Great Void divine ruins, a powerful tremor suddenly appeared. Rumble! It was as if thunder shocked the world. However, there was no surge of lightning. There was only a vast and boundless aura. The aura was mixed and chaotic. It was like an invisible wave surging, rolling up tens of thousands of huge waves that shook endlessly. Waves of shocking aura also sounded. It was like the roar and roar of an ancient giant beast. Countless chaotic auras swept over from all directions and gathered at the center. They became more and more intense. Gradually, they turned into darkness and descended, as if a demon god had descended. Rumble! The first black lightning appeared. It tore apart the darkness, but it also made the darkness deeper. Strike down! Streaks of pitch-black lightning carried extremely terrifying destructive power. They struck down from the sky one after another, as if they wanted to shatter this piece of ruined land that was adjacent to the center of the ruined land. It was extremely terrifying and could destroy everything. However, the lightning that struck down did not really destroy this piece of ruined land. Instead, it was continuously absorbed by a mysterious force. It was absorbed again and again. The ground shook violently. A strong black light swept out and rushed into the sky. In just an instant, it spread out rapidly. It was like a surging black wave that covered all directions. 10 breaths. In less than 10 breaths, the entire ruined land was covered by the black light. At the center, a small pagoda drilled out from the ground and landed on the ground. It continued to expand. In the blink of an eye, the small pagoda became a huge pagoda. It was as if it suppressed the entire ruined land. Countless chaotic auras flowed into the huge pagoda and were continuously absorbed. Even the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda has appeared. As expected, the divination this time was not wrong. The 3 great void divine treasures have really appeared. The group of transcendent realm cultivators from the sacred land were all stunned. Then, they were overjoyed. They immediately exploded with astonishing speed and flew in the direction of the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda. Chapter 2248. It was dark and lightless. From afar, it looked like a dark and desolate domain. The chaotic and impure aura in the surroundings was constantly being absorbed. In the sky, there were bolts of dark lightning striking down recklessly. The huge black tower in the center was constantly absorbing and devouring the bolts of dark lightning. Heavenly void world suppressing pagoda, this old man is coming. Since it has appeared at this time, the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda should belong to me. This pagoda is fated to be with me. One by one, the transcendent realm experts unleashed their powerful auras, sweeping up streaks of light as they charged towards the area covered by the dark light. Fast, extremely fast, extremely fast. The one with the blazing flames was the transcendent realm expert from the myriad tribulation Godflame Mountain. The one who moved swiftly through the void was an expert from the heavenly will palace. The one with the intent to fight was the eternal battle fort's expert. The one with a strong body, whose every movement was like a raging tide, was a powerhouse from the purple extreme hall of Ju Yuan. There was also an expert covered in black lightning, and exuding a terrifying aura. He did not belong to the sacred grounds, but he was also very scary. These transcendent realm experts were not only strong, but also knowledgeable. They knew the value of the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda. The four great sacred grounds wanted it, as did the great sects of the stellar fields. Even the rogue cultivators wanted it. If the rogue cultivators obtained the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda, they could trade it with the four great sacred grounds and request for it. For example, they could become elders of the four great sacred grounds and obtain important resources from the four great sacred grounds. All in all, there were many benefits. They had to fight for it. The heavenly void world suppressing pagoda of the human race. A muscular non-humankind being, who had a horn on his head, sneered coldly. His cold eyes shone with an extremely sharp light as he said, "If we can bring this tower back, not only will the humankind lose a great treasure, our kind will also gain a great treasure, which will be very useful in the future." As soon as he finished speaking, the one-horned alien stomped his feet lightly, and with a boom, the ground shattered. The explosive power he unleashed was shocking to the extreme. His entire being was like a meteor as he shot through the pitch-black area and charged into the darkness. It wasn't just this one-horned foreign expert who moved. The other foreign race experts moved as well. Heavenly void world suppressing pagoda. The heavenly void world suppressing pagoda was the first of the three divine weapons of the Great Void sect. It was the most mysterious over-God weapon. During the invasion of the foreign tribes, the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda had displayed astonishing power, causing the deaths of many powerful cultivators of the foreign tribes. Of course, the shattering void mirror and the void thunderclap robe were also extraordinarily powerful. They had killed many foreign race elites, but in comparison, the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda was even more terrifying. If the foreign races could take away the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda, it would not be a good thing for the human race, but it would definitely be a good thing for the foreign races. Even though the human race and the non-human race had an agreement to coexist peacefully, that was only relative. No one could guarantee that when the non-humankind recovered and became stronger, they wouldn't gather an army and invade the Western Void again. In front of the interests of the race, everything else had to stand aside. The aura emitted by the awakening of the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda was extremely powerful. One could feel it even from afar. As a result, it became like a lighthouse, attracting even more people. However, there was no Tao manipulation realm cultivator. That was because it was simply impossible to go deep into the great void divine ruins with the strength of the path manipulation realm. The deeper he went, the more chaotic and chaotic the aura became. There was also the possibility of encountering demonic souls and so on. It was extremely dangerous. In the center of the darkness, at the top of the black pagoda, a will was awakening. It was as if a pair of eyes had opened and were staring at it. How many years have passed? It seemed to be a heavy sigh that echoed in the darkness. The aura became stronger and stronger, and the voices were like the roars of a storm, becoming more and more resounding and intense. The divine gate has become history and disappeared into the river of time. However, the power of the divine gate will not disappear. The heavenly void world suppressing pagoda, is here. If you want to take me away, then come. Whoever can reach the top will have the right to take me away. The last sentence was like a thunderclap that swept out in a mighty manner. That is, the spirit of the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda has awakened. It seems that the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda was not severely damaged in the great battle back then. For example, the shattering void mirror and the void thunderclap robe were both severely damaged, so much so that their spirits fell into a deep sleep and were difficult to wake up. Only the spirit of the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda had awakened, which meant that the damage was not very serious. As long as I can reach the top, I can take away the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda. The one to reach the top will definitely be me. Everyone became more and more excited. Previously, although they all wanted to take the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda away, it was not that easy. Now it was equivalent to having a clear direction. Reach the top. As long as they reach the top. Reach the top? Chunzong's eyes flashed. Originally, Chunzong planned to find the shattering void mirror because the route was closer. However, the sudden appearance of the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda attracted Chunzong's attention. In terms of value, the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda was better than the shattering void mirror. Now, the spirit of the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda had awakened and spoken. They could fight for it. Of course, the other point was that the powerhouses of the Will Heavenly Palace would probably also go to the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda. At that time, if they joined forces, he would not be powerless to face the transcendent powerhouses. With the other powerhouses of the Will Heavenly Palace, the chances of fighting for the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda would undoubtedly be greater. Without hesitation, Chunzong immediately changed his route and rushed toward the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda. At the same time, he took out medicinal pills to replenish the energy consumed by rushing at full speed. The sword light rushed forward and flew in an instant, constantly approaching the ruins where the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda was. At a glance, it was as if absolute darkness had appeared in front of one's eyes. From the outside, one could only see the darkness and could not see anything inside. Chunzong noticed that someone rushed in quickly and disappeared into the darkness, as if he was swallowed by the darkness. Chunzong's speed did not decrease at all. He also flew quickly and crashed into the darkness. In an instant, Chunzong felt that the darkness was filled with an extremely strong chaotic aura. It was more than 10 times stronger than outside the darkness. The stronger this chaotic aura was, the more obvious the impact it had on the cultivator. It seriously interfered with the operation of the cultivation power. Whether it was chi refining, body refining, or other powers, they would all be disturbed. The difficulty of operating them would increase dramatically. Imperceptibly, one's strength would be affected and then decline. As he continued to enter, the feeling of interference became more and more intense. Then, when Chunzong completely entered the darkness, he was surprised to find that it was not as dark as it looked from the outside. Although it was still dark, he could see things in the darkness. It was like the darkness at the beginning of the night when the sun was setting, not the darkness of the middle of the night. In addition, the chaotic and mixed aura inside seemed to have been sorted out and became orderly. It turned into 2 completely different and opposing auras. They opposed each other and collided with each other, but there was a sense of harmony. It was very strange. Being in it, Chunzong felt that his cultivation power, whether it was chi refining or body refining, was disturbed. It was a very serious disturbance. He only felt that he could only exert less than 50% of his usual cultivation power. The other thing was the Great Path. In here, the power of the Great Path seemed to have become very weak and chaotic. It was even more difficult to mobilize. In other words, in here, the extent of his combat strength was very limited. Chen Zong estimated that it was less than 30% of his usual strength. The first power of the Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda is to interfere with the use of power, whether it's cultivation or the power of the Great Path, and then affect one's combat strength. Chen Zong thought to himself, in this case, I shouldn't be the only one affected. This situation might be more beneficial to me. Although he thought so, Chen Zong was not sure. Staring ahead, he could vaguely see a huge black shadow standing in the darkness, as if it was infinitely tall. Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda. Chen Zong said word by word. After calming down, he suddenly took a step forward and ran up. In here, the interference was too serious, so it was difficult for him to use some of his supernatural powers. However, it was not difficult for Chen Zong. Other than Chen Zong, there were also others rushing toward the Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda from all directions. Reach the top. As long as they could reach the top, they could take away the Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda. It sounded like the spirit of the Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda would cooperate to take it away, so the difficulty would be much lower than forcefully taking it away. Therefore, the people who entered the dark domain did not fight at all. Instead, they all rushed into the Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda. They all knew that the real battle would begin in the Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda. Reach the top. It sounded very simple, but it was probably very difficult to do. After all, it was not just him. There were many people, and many people meant competition. In the end, only one person could reach the top and take away the Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda. Everyone was clear about this. Fight. The human race wanted to fight, and so did the foreign race. In short, since they had entered this place, they had to fight. Long before Chen Zong entered this place, someone had already stepped into the Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda. It was not in the dark domain, but in the real Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda. Close. Chen Zong continued to approach the Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda. When the person in front of him approached the Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda, his figure instantly disappeared. Yes, he directly disappeared. When Chen Zong himself was 10 meters away from the Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda, he immediately felt an irresistible force land on his body. Then, as if he was traveling through time and space, under the guidance of that force, he directly flew forward. His speed was extremely fast, like a flickering shadow. In just an instant, Chen Zong discovered that he had passed through the body of the Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda. The black body of the pagoda did not seem to exist. It was as if it was in vain. It was also as if his body had been turned into an illusion. It was very strange. In short, when he felt that his feet were on the ground, Chen Zong was shocked to discover that his strength had disappeared. He could not feel it. It was as if he had become an ordinary person. Chapter 2249. There were tens of thousands of mighty prowess cultivators who had entered the great void divine ruins, including the foreign races. However, more than half of them were in the Tao manipulation realm. It was difficult for them to enter the great void divine ruins with their Tao manipulation realm combat power. The interference was too severe, and their energy consumption was increasing. They could not hold on any longer. In addition, they might encounter danger and other powerful cultivators. In the end, only a few thousand cultivators reached the inner area and stepped into the Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda. Thousands of people appeared in the Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda. Every one of them, regardless of whether they were in the Yuanming realm or the mighty prowess realm, human or foreign, had their power suppressed and could not be mobilized. They were reduced to ordinary people. Everyone was not used to losing that terrifying power that could destroy mountains and destroy heaven and earth. It was as if they had become weak chickens. It was very uncomfortable. No one moved. Instead, they stood and maintained a high level of vigilance. At a glance, they could see other people. However, they could only see their figures and not their bodies. Other than themselves, they did not know who the others were. It was mysterious and strange. Welcome to the heavenly void world-suppressing pagoda. I am the pagoda spirit. A laugh suddenly sounded. It seemed to have a hint of mischief. Immediately, light scattered. Like the afterglow of the setting sun, a figure condensed out of thin air and slowly descended. Mu Yu was bathed in the afterglow of the setting sun. It was a figure wearing a long white robe. His face could not be seen clearly. He seemed to be very young, but also very old. An indescribable aura spread out from the figure. Under the afterglow of the setting sun, he was like a god. Everyone has heard what this pagoda spirit said. Whoever can reach the top will be qualified to take the heavenly void world-suppressing pagoda away, the pagoda spirit said again. However, there was a hint of ridicule in his voice. Immediately, everyone's breathing became rapid. Their eyes shone with a strong light. Take away the heavenly void world-suppressing pagoda. Everyone wanted to do so. However, there are too many of you. I counted. There are a total of 2,788 people. The pagoda spirit laughed again. However, only one person can take away the heavenly void world-suppressing pagoda. What should we do? Everyone could not help but feel that something was wrong. Fight for it. The strong are respected. The weak are not qualified to take away this pagoda. Due to the fact that your cultivation levels are different, there is a difference in your combat strength. This is unfair. Therefore, all of you have temporarily sealed your strength. In other words, the strength you have is the strength of an ordinary person. Yes, a little stronger than ordinary people, but not as strong as cultivators. Let's fight for it. There are 99 tower tokens here. Whoever obtains a tower token will be able to enter the next level. As soon as it said those words, the pagoda spirit waved its hand and countless streaks of light shot out. There were a total of 99 streaks of light, and they slowly revolved in the surroundings. I'll give you a reminder. Remember, choose the weapon you're best at first. In an instant the afterglow bloomed, as if the setting sun had turned into a blazing sun, dispelling all the darkness, allowing everyone to clearly appear under the light, as well as in the eyes of others. Sword, Chen Zong shouted without hesitation, and a long sword appeared in his hand. It was very handy, whether it was the weight, length, or comfort. However, Chen Zong could tell at a glance that it was a very ordinary sword. This was because his cultivation level and great path power had been sealed. Even the ultimate heart phaseless sword had been suppressed and could not be used. Therefore, the only thing he could use was this ordinary sword. After all, everything he had learned was on the sword. In a situation where he had lost his powerful strength, having a sword in hand was the most reassuring thing. At the same time, weapons appeared in the hands of others. Swords, sabers, spears, staffs, halberds, and so on. As for those who cultivated fist and palm techniques, gloves appeared on their hands, and those who cultivated leg techniques had battle shoes on their feet. Chen Zong also saw the people from the Will Sky Palace. There were Yuan underworld true disciples like him, as well as divine ability realm elders. However, that was not all of them. In addition, many people from the innumerable Divine Flame Mountain, Jiuan Purple Extreme Hall and Eternal Battle Fort were also present. The others were Yuan Underworld and Divine Ability Realm cultivators from the Star Domain's great sects, as well as some unaffiliated cultivators. There were also a dozen foreign races. Chernzong remembered that there were dozens of foreign races that had entered the Great Void ruins. However, there were only a dozen of them that had entered the heavenly void world-suppressing pagoda. However, the bodies of these foreign races exuded traces of terrifying aura fluctuations, as if they possessed extraordinary strength. They did not use any weapons, as their bodies were the best weapons for them. Even if they had lost the power they had gained through cultivation, these foreign races were born with strong physique. This was not affected in the slightest. In an instant, a speck of light fell from the sky. It was a pagoda ascension token. The speck of light did not fall quickly, and its trajectory was erratic and difficult to find. No one knew where it would land. Everyone's attention was drawn to the speck of light. Their eyes flickered as they stared at the speck of light and moved along with it, constantly trying to predict where it would land. However, in a situation where one's strength was suppressed, they could not use their divine consciousness. Their thinking ability was not as good as before, so it was difficult to determine where the speck of light would land. Even Chernzong found it difficult to do so. They could only rely on luck. In an instant, the second speck of light fell. The third speck. The fourth speck. More and more specks of light fell. Finally, all 99 specks of light fell, landing in all directions. It was as if the stars were spinning, and there was a sense of brilliance to it. As the specks spun, everyone stared at them and suddenly felt a little dizzy. All of a sudden, a muscular non-humankind being with a long horn on his head slightly bent his legs. Under his dark green skin, his muscles bulged one after another, and his veins bulged out one after another, making him look like a boa, which was quite a shocking sight. That pair of legs immediately exploded with a terrifying power. With a bang, like the roar of a drum, the one-horned foreign race member instantly shot up into the sky, jumping 5 or 6 meters high. His thick and long arms, which were covered with a tough greenish-black skin, grabbed the air with his 5 hook-like fingers. A whistling gust of wind swept up, and he suddenly grabbed at a speck of light. His attack was as fast as lightning. It was very shocking. Of course, if it was under normal circumstances, this kind of power would not be much and would be insignificant. However, one had to know that everyone's cultivation power was suppressed and sealed. They were relying on the strength of their bodies before they cultivated. Using the strength of their bodies without cultivation to jump 5 or 6 meters high and make a whistling sound like the wind when they attacked, this kind of power was extremely shocking. It showed that the strength of their bodies was extremely terrifying. It was far beyond the standard of a normal person, at least several times stronger than the standard of a normal person. Under the situation where his cultivation base was suppressed, it was undoubtedly very difficult for him to fight against this foreign race with the strength of his body that he had yet to cultivate. Fortunately, there were only a dozen or so foreign races, and there were 99 tower ascension tokens. However, the one-horned foreign race member's grab did not succeed in grabbing that speck of light. The speck of light seemed to have a mind of its own. In an instant, it dodged. However, it did not deliberately avoid it. Instead, it followed a fleeting trajectory and very naturally slipped by the one-horned foreign race member's palm. The foreign race member was slightly stunned. His eyes widened and he seemed to be in disbelief. His grab had missed. How was this possible? His reaction was very fast. He suddenly grabbed with his other hand, and a violent gust of wind whistled endlessly. However, he missed again. Furious, the one-horned foreign race member suddenly swung his arms. It was as if he had attacked more than 10 times in a breath, but it was still useless. He did not catch any specks of light. The one-horned foreign race member landed on the ground and did not catch any specks of light. At this moment, from the corner of his eye, he saw a human stretch out his hand and luckily catch a speck of light. "That's mine." The one-horned being suddenly let out an enraged roar as he unleashed another attack, mercilessly unleashing his full power. With a boom, the air seemed to explode. The human cultivator who had just caught the speck of light did not have time to rejoice. He immediately felt an extremely terrifying aura that was wrapped in a shocking murderous intent. He wanted to dodge, but he found that he could not. His body seemed to be thousands of kilograms heavy, as if he was carrying a mountain on his back. His limbs also seemed to be frozen. Unable to dodge, he wanted to attack, but he found that he was one step too slow. With a boom, he felt a huge force coming at him. He felt as if he had been hit by a statue of the god of berserkers head-on, or as if he had been hit by a 1,000-pound boulder. His bones let out cracking sounds, unable to bear the weight, and broke. His muscles were torn, and he was sent flying, coughing up blood. One hit. With just one hit, this human, who was originally a transcendent, was severely injured and on the verge of death. The foreign race member's strength was too terrifying, and his attack speed was also extremely fast. Although his cultivation base was suppressed and he only had the strength of his body before he cultivated as a powerhouse, his use of his strength was also very shocking. This was not something that ordinary people could compare to. With the strength of an ordinary person, they could easily deal with 10, dozens, or even hundreds of ordinary people. This was because they could unleash their strength to the extreme and surpass their limit. This was the case for both the human race and the foreign race. With one hit, he was directly injured and killed. The speck of light also fell into the one-horned foreign race member's hand. Weakling. The one-horned foreign race member grabbed the speck of light and sneered. In the situation where they had lost their cultivation base, the human race was a weakling to the foreign race. After all, the human race did not have the naturally strong physique of the foreign race. The difference was several times. Moreover, both of them had cultivated, and their fighting methods were also very good. They could directly crush the other party. If the human race and the foreign race did not have any cultivation base in the battle many years ago, the human race would have been defeated long ago. This void would have long belonged to the foreign race. Take away all the tower ascension tokens, the one-horned foreign race member shouted. A bunch of weaklings. You have lost your cultivation base, and you still want to fight with us? The other foreign race members also mocked. They were also speaking the human language. After all, the foreign race had their own language, and at the same time, they could also learn the human language. Ridicule. In a situation where they had the advantage, the foreign race members mocked the human race mercilessly, even if the human race outnumbered the foreign race members. Chapter 2250. It was a small giant. He was over 2 meters tall and had a strong body, like an iron tower. His body exuded a ferocious aura. It was a middle-aged man. Judging from his armor and insignia, he was from the Purple Extreme Hall of Jiuan. Wang Tianzhong. Wang Tianzhong is a new elder of the Purple Extreme Hall of Jiuan. He is talented and has amazing divine strength. He could lift 1,000 jin even before he started cultivating. A Yuan underworld direct disciple from the Will Heavenly Palace said. He also has a younger brother called Wang Tianding, who is also a direct disciple of the Purple Extreme Hall of Jiuan. He is also very talented. Wang Tianding. Chunzong muttered. It was the person who had suddenly attacked him and fled when he realized that he wasn't easy to deal with. As expected, Wang Tianzhong's appearance was similar to Wang Tianding's. Come, come. Let me, Wang Tianzhong, see what you losers are capable of. Wang Tianzhong's aura surged with every step he took. Even though he had the body of an ordinary person, his innate divine strength was still very terrifying. His application of his own strength was even more shocking. When it came to the application of physical strength, body refinement cultivators were better than chi refinement cultivators. After all, chi refinement cultivators mainly cultivated inner chi, which wasn't part of the physical body. Although body refinement cultivators could also control tyrannical strength, it was inseparable from the physical body. The purple extreme hall of Jiuan focused on body refinement. Many light spots were still circling in the sky. They hadn't completely landed yet, as if there was a force controlling them. Currently, only the one in the hands of the one-horned alien was in possession of it. However, it didn't mean that it was stable after obtaining it. They still had to hold on to it. At the top of the sky, a pair of eyes stared at them with a hint of a smile. It was a mocking smile. It was the tower spirit. It was watching a show. After so many years of loneliness, it naturally wanted to watch a good show. Wang Tianzhong's words seemed to have stepped on the alien race's sore spot. Their faces darkened and they almost exploded. Weak human, let me, Tu Lulu, teach you a lesson. An equally tall and muscular alien race stepped out. His body was filled with an extremely terrifying aura. His footsteps were like the beating of a drum, causing the ground to tremble slightly. Boom! The strong wind roared as Tu Lulu raised his fist. The veins on his thick arm bulged and his muscles tightened. His 5 fingers clenched into a fist as he suddenly threw out a punch with an extremely powerful force. This punch seemed to be able to shatter mountains. Wang Tianzhong's eyes narrowed. He lowered his waist and sat in a horse stance. His 5 fingers clenched into a fist, and the joint of his middle finger protruded slightly. He suddenly exerted force, and the muscles on his forearm suddenly swelled up. In an instant it swelled up like a thigh, which was very shocking. With a boom, Wang Tianzhong punched out with his gloved fist. His 1,000 gene of strength was pushed to the limit, surpassing the limit, and carried with it an extremely tyrannical strength. Without the slightest bit of trickery, the 2 fists collided in an instant. It was as if 2 gigantic boulders weighing over 500 kilograms had collided. Streams of strong air currents were created from the collision, turning into rings that swept out and then turned into gusts of strong wind that blew past. The 2 fists seemed to be glued together and did not separate from the impact. Tu Lulu's face was ferocious as he continued to exert force. One could see the veins on his arms turning like pythons. Wang Tianzhong's eyes widened and his face turned red. That was the sign of his blood and qi bursting out. The muscles on his thick arms trembled as if there were little mice shuttling back and forth. Burst. Burst after burst, and the power was released continuously, trying to push the opponent back. However, they were evenly matched. All eyes were on the 2 of them. Who would win? With a boom, another round of power burst out. In the midst of the collision, the 2 arms suddenly trembled and separated. Whether it was Tu Lulu or Wang Tianzhong, their bodies leaned back slightly. Their legs exerted force, and their other hands suddenly blasted out. They met force with force, and only used their tyrannical power to attack. It was as if a big drum was constantly beating, and the rumbling sound was surging. The power was astonishing. However, everyone also noticed that the more Tu Lulu attacked, the more violent he seemed to be. His originally ferocious face looked even more ferocious. He even grinned. Tu Lulu's mouth was already very big. When he grinned, it looked even more shocking. It was like the mouth of a shark, ready to devour flesh and blood. Weakling, is this all you've got? You've really disappointed me. On the contrary, Wang Tianzhong was still able to exchange blows with Tu Lulu in the beginning. However, after a while, both of his arms were trembling slightly, and there were signs that he could not hold on any longer. The innate difference between the human race and the alien race's physique began to show. Before cultivating, the human race would not be able to fight against the alien race with their innate physique. That was because the alien race had great power and extremely terrifying muscles, bones, and skin. They were even born with the ability to resist some ordinary sword attack. Wang Tianzhong was born with a powerful physique, and he had the strength of 1,000 gene. Among the ordinary people, He was simply an invincible existence. However, he was still a human, and he had not broken through the limit of the human race. Even if he was stronger than ordinary people and could fight against the alien race, he was still innately weaker than the alien race. Blood burst. Wang Tianzhong shouted in a low voice like an angry bear roaring. In a split second, strands of blood-red color spread out from his arm like lightning. The muscles of his right arm were filled with blood instantly, and it expanded even more. His entire arm also turned blood red in an instant, like a big boiled shrimp. Wisps of hot air began to spread out. Boom! The punch was extremely ferocious. When Tu Lulu met it, his arm trembled as if it was knocked back. His whole body even slid back a few meters, and his arm was trembling slightly. The dozen or so alien race members were stunned. In a head-on collision, he was actually knocked back. Then, Tu Lulu's expression became even more ferocious. His mouth opened wider, and his eyes shone with a fierce light as if he was going to swallow Chen Zong whole. An extremely terrifying aura erupted from his body, and it turned into a murderous aura that soared into the sky. All right, the point is not to determine the winner, but to fight for the Tower Ascension token. An elder of the Great Purple Extreme Palace spoke and stepped forward. He had already seen that Wang Tianzhong's punch was a secret technique. It could not be called a secret technique, but it was a heavy burden on his body, and he would not be able to use it again in a short period of time. Once the alien race attacked again, Wang Tianzhong would not be able to block it. In a split second, a dot of light fell from the sky, attracting everyone's attention. Attack! Fight for it! Fall down, all of you! At the top of the sky, the tower's spirit laughed evilly. Then, the remaining 98 dots of light fell in an even more mysterious and erratic way. The alien race members did not have time to deal with Wang Tianzhong. Instead, they locked onto one of the dots of light and attacked one by one. Thousands of people fought for dozens of dots of light, and the scene immediately became chaotic. Chen Zong did not move. He stared at one of the dots of light, and his eyes followed it without blinking. In a split second, Chen Zong attacked. Even though he was just an ordinary person, he instantly exploded with extraordinary speed. More importantly, it had a natural trajectory. Catch it! Chen Zong immediately caught the dot of light in his hand. Not many people noticed this, and they did not pay too much attention to it. After all, the current situation did not give them time to think about it. The tower spirit in the sky suddenly focused on Chen Zong, and his eyes flashed with surprise. The falling dot of light was slightly affected by him, and its trajectory was erratic and unpredictable. If their cultivation was not suppressed, these cultivators would naturally be able to catch it easily. But now they were just ordinary people, and even their thinking was affected and weakened to the extreme. Just like that, he caught a ray of light in an instant. It didn't seem like a coincidence, but rather, it had a natural feel to it. This was something that could only be achieved by those who had reached an astonishing level of control over their own strength and had an incomparably solid foundation. Chen Zong was such a person. Compared to the thousands of people present, Chen Zong's background could be said to be very humble. Although he was now a true disciple of Will Heavenly Palace and had a higher status than many people, in fact, the origin of the people present, even the rogue cultivators, was not comparable to Chen Zong's. These people cultivated from ordinary people to the transcendent realm in a very short time. It was not because of their outstanding talent, but because of the influence of their environment. As for Chen Zong, he was born in a small place in a remote corner of the secondary world. He cultivated from the lowest level of martial arts, and rose little by little. There was a difference in foundation. Fight for the Tower Ascension tokens that had not yet been obtained. Fight for the Tower Ascension tokens that had already been obtained. This is mine. The one-horned man swept his right arm, and a strong wind roared. Although he had already obtained a tower ascension token, he was not satisfied. If he took the other tower ascension tokens, he would be able to reach the top directly. Although the innate physique of the human race was not as good as that of the foreign race, in terms of the application of martial arts, a small number of humans could more or less contend with the foreign race. Junior, give the tower ascension token to this old man. A transcendent realm old man rushed towards Chunzong, and his hand reached out, wriggling like a snake. The old man could not use his cultivation, and only his physical strength could be used to perform some very simple martial arts. But even so, the simple martial arts in the hands of a transcendent realm powerhouse still had amazing power. What responded to the old man was a flash of sword light. The sword light wasn't fast, but it had an indescribable sharpness. It was as if it could tear through everything, as if it could pierce through one's mind. The sword broke through the air and blocked his attack, causing him to be unable to break through. This caused the elder to be extremely shocked. At the same time, the flash of sword light was close to his arm. Retreat. The transcendent realm old man hurriedly retreated, avoiding the flash of sword light. He could not help but break out in a cold sweat. What kind of swordsmanship was this? Why was it so mysterious? It felt unfathomable. The old man stared at Chen Zong for a while, and finally gave up. He rushed towards the other people who had obtained the tower ascension tokens. Obviously, Chen Zong was a tough nut to crack. However, there were many people, and there would always be someone who did not know better than to attack Chen Zong. Give me the tower ascension token. Wang Tianzhong recovered slightly after the explosion of his blood qi, and immediately rushed towards Chen Zong. He opened his hand and swept it like a cattail leaf fan, causing a strong gust of wind, and roared endlessly. When the cattail leaf fan-like palm blasted towards Chen Zong, it paused for a moment, then suddenly reached out and grabbed the tower ascension token in Chen Zong's left hand. Chapter 2251. Wang Tianzhong, the new elder of Jiyuan's Purple Extreme Palace, was born with great strength. He could lift 1,000 pounds with a single arm. When his palm came, a strong wind pressure swept over, blowing Chen Zong's robe and long hair. The air in front of him was sucked dry. Not only was he unable to breathe, but he also felt suffocated. The wind pressure was so strong that Chen Zong's cheeks unconsciously sunk in. Wang Tianzhong did not hold back in this attack. If Chen Zong could not withstand it, he would most likely be severely injured. Chen Zong's eyebrows furrowed slightly as he made a decisive and merciless move. His feet moved in a disorderly manner as he continuously changed his position. He raised his sword, and an extremely sharp sword glow tore apart the strong wind pressure as if it was cutting through the wind. Facing that palm, he raised his long sword and counterattacked. Wang Tianzhong revealed a grim smile. His opponent's sword was just an ordinary sword. Moreover, his opponent's strength was not as good as his own. Moreover, he was wearing gloves that could block the sword light. Wang Tianzhong's hand didn't change, but his strength seemed to have increased by several notches. This palm strike directly knocked Chen Zong to the ground, and even severely injured him. As for Chen Zong's identity, Wang Tianzhong didn't care. No matter how strong Will Heavenly Palace was, it was still on the same level as Jiyuan's Purple Extreme Palace. As long as he did not kill this person, it would be fine. This thought flashed through Wang Tianzhong's mind. The moment the sword light approached, he suddenly clenched his 5 fingers, trying to catch Chen Zong's sword. The protection of the gloves was enough to protect his hand from being injured by the sword. Coupled with his great strength, it was enough for him to hold the sword tightly. Wang Tianzhong's plan was good, but unfortunately, he underestimated Chen Zong and overestimated himself. Chen Zong raised his sword, but with an indescribable mystery, it avoided Wang Tianzhong's grasp. It was like a shadow in the water, making Wang Tianzhong feel that he had caught it. In fact, what he caught was just an illusion, as if it was a real illusion. It was too fast, incomparably mysterious, and exceeded everyone's expectations. The sword light arrived and slashed across Wang Tianzhong's chest, tearing open a wound. Immediately, the sword light fell and connected with each other like a chain of 9 swords. Every sword fell on Wang Tianzhong's body. It was unstoppable and extremely mysterious. It felt as if it was a part of nature. Wang Tianzhong only felt that no matter how he attacked, he could not catch the sword light, nor could he resist it. He could only howl. The sword light paused for a moment before disappearing completely. Wang Tianzhong's body was now covered with many wounds, all of which spurted out blood. Retreat, retreat, retreat. As the blood spurted out, Wang Tianzhong felt his strength draining away. If he still had his cultivation, this kind of injury wouldn't be a problem at all. He could easily recover and there wouldn't be any impact. However, his current body was at the level of an ordinary person. Even if he was born with divine strength, he still couldn't break away from the level of an ordinary person's body. Wang Tianzhong's expression changed greatly. He hurriedly retreated far away from Chenzong. Chenzong didn't chase after him. With this kind of injury, Wang Tianzhong had almost lost his combat ability. Another reason was that there were other people who wanted to kill him and try to seize the Tower Ascension token in his hand. For a moment, Chenzong was under great pressure. There were only 99 Tower Ascension tokens in total, but there were nearly 3,000 people fighting for them. In other words, every person who got a Tower Ascension token had to face the covetous eyes of more than 20 strong enemies on average. However, this was not the case. Some people who got the Tower Ascension token faced fewer strong enemies, while some faced more enemies. 3 figures attacked together. They were from the same force, and their target was Chenzong. These 3 people were holding long sabers. They raised them and slashed down together. The saber radiance cut through the air and directly cut off Chenzong's escape. He could only face the attack head-on or retreat. However, the saber radiance was dazzling and the saber pressure was amazing. It was so terrifying that it made people lose the courage to fight and involuntarily want to retreat. However, there was a follow-up change. If Chenzong retreated, he would immediately be attracted by the aura. The saber radiance of the other party would sweep up and become more powerful and violent. Finally, it would turn into an irresistible saber storm. An ordinary person's body and strength could still release terrible lethality with the low-level martial arts that he had practiced. Chenzong narrowed his eyes slightly. His eyes flashed as if they could see through everything. He didn't retreat. Instead, he took a step forward. His long sword vibrated and made a series of pleasant buzzing sounds. A stream of light flowed on the sword. The sword radiance of this sword was dazzling. It cut through the air as if it was blocking the river and cutting through the cloud. The 3 saber pressures were broken in an instant. The saber radiance also paused. Then, there was the ear-piercing sound of the saber and sword clashing. It was as if the eardrums were being pierced. The sword radiance was like a dazzling shadow. Then, the 3 sabers flew out of the hands of the 3 people. Their wrists were bleeding. Their faces changed and they hurriedly retreated. Brilliant basic swordsmanship. The pagoda spirit stared at Chenzong in amazement. This basic swordsmanship was so brilliant that it was rare to see it even when the Great Void Holy Sect was still around. Although the Great Void Holy Sect majored in array formation and minor in weapon forging, not everyone was like this. There were a few people from the Holy Sect who majored in other things, such as swordsmanship or saber dao. Moreover, their attainments were very high and their combat power was extremely strong. No matter what, the Great Void Holy Sect was a holy land with a deep foundation. It was not difficult to cultivate some martial arts expert. However, there was no one whose basic swordsmanship was as profound as this. Of course, the pagoda spirit did not know that Chen Zong started from nothing. At the beginning, he was only able to cultivate basic swordsmanship. Moreover, he had never given up on it. As for the other cultivators in the void, although they also started from basic swordsmanship, their basic swordsmanship was quickly replaced by more advanced swordsmanship because their cultivation level increased faster. At that time, their main focus would be on the more advanced swordsmanship. Even after they had obtained the martial arts of the divine powers, they would focus on the divine powers. Everyone's cultivation time was limited. Their energy was also limited. Of course, they had to allocate it appropriately. After severely injuring Wang Tianzhong and repelling the three sabersmen, Chen Zong turned around. The sword radiance was like a thunderbolt that split the sky. The sword pierced through and directly pierced the long spear that was coming from behind him. The body of the long spear trembled and rolled up layers of spear shadows. It was like a flower that was blooming, making it impossible to tell where it would eventually stab. It was an extremely advanced spear technique. However, Chen Zong's sword pierced through in a straight line. There was no forced movement. There was only a kind of determination, a determination that could cut through all obstacles. No matter how you change, I will only break it with one sword. This sword seemed to have the help of the gods. The sword radiance was about to strike. The spear flower paused, as if it had been pierced through the stamen of a flower. It exploded into pieces. Immediately after, the moment the body of the spear and the sword came into contact, the sword trembled slightly. The trembling body of the spear was directly broken. The sword radiance seemed to carry Chen Zong's body. It was as if he and the sword were one. It was as if they had become one. In the blink of an eye, the sword had already arrived. It was as fast as lightning. The person holding the spear did not hesitate to turn around and sweep the body of the spear. However, he was still a little too slow. His shoulder was immediately pierced through. The body of the spear also paused. The momentum of the counterattack was immediately broken by Chen Zong. The sword was pulled out. Blood also sprayed out like a fountain. The person holding the spear was pale. He kept retreating, not daring to attack Chen Zong again. His pale face was filled with horror. He was in the transcendent state. He had practiced the spear for thousands of years. Even if he had temporarily lost his cultivation and was only at the level of an ordinary person, he could still perform the mysterious and powerful spear technique with his accumulation of experience. Even if he was facing hundreds of ordinary elite soldiers, he could still kill them all. However, such a spear technique was broken and injured by the opponent's sword in just 2 or 3 moves. Chen Zong did not pursue him because there were others rushing over. A kick swept up the wind and clouds, and a mighty blast came. With a solemn expression, Chen Zong held the sword in his hand. His long hair fluttered. He was not afraid at all. If he could use his cultivation, he would not have the slightest ability to compete with a group of transcendent state powerhouses. However, everyone's cultivation was now restricted. They could not use it for the time being. Other than those who were born with divine strength and the foreign races, the rest of the people's innate physiques were not much different. They could only use the strength of an ordinary person and their well-honed martial arts attainments. Moreover, it was based on basic martial arts attainment. Chen Zong did not have the confidence to compete with transcendent state powerhouses. After all, the transcendent state powerhouses were already stronger than his. They also had natal transcendent state powerhouses, which was even more terrifying. If they used natal transcendent state powerhouses, he would not be able to resist at all. He would be turned into ashes in an instant. However, it was different now. He was very good at using the body of an ordinary person to perform basic sword technique. It was also close combat. Confidence, strong confidence made Chen Zong's sword seem to be sharper. 1, 2, 3, no matter who it was, as long as they coveted Chen Zong's tower token and tried to steal it, they were all repelled by Chen Zong. With a single strike, it was as if he had the help of the gods. True disciple Chen's sword technique is indeed terrifying. Otherwise, why would he be called the unparalleled godly sword? The elders of Will Heavenly Palace were secretly shocked. At this moment, they fully realized that the unparalleled godly sword lived up to its name. This human sword technique is so profound. He must have extraordinary talent and potential. This is not a good thing for our race. A foreign race powerhouse with a lithe body like a cheetah's eyes flashed coldly. He directly repelled a human, who fell to the ground and spat out blood. Obviously, he was badly injured. He quickly rushed towards Chen Zong. When human beings fought against other human beings, although they said that they would try their best, they would still try their best not to injure their vital parts. However, when non-humankind beings fought against human beings, it was different. They would directly deal heavy blows. However, even though there were only a dozen or so of them, each and every one of them had innately powerful physique. Not only were they powerful and fast, but they also possessed astonishing explosive power. Furthermore, their defensive capabilities were also extremely terrifying. Furthermore, the human race did not all join forces, so in a short period of time, many cultivators were severely injured by the foreign races. Chapter 2252. Today, there were hundreds of known alien tribes, each with their own talents and strength. Innately, they were incomparable to the human tribe. But among the hundreds of alien tribes, there were also differences in strength. The one attacking now was the hunting tribe, one of the top 10 alien tribes. Their talent was to transform into shadows. Although their strength was not much stronger than the human tribe, their speed was much faster and they were good at instantaneous bursts. The hunting tribe had played the role of scouts and assassins for the alien tribe alliance during the war many years ago. They had assassinated many human tribe experts. Now, the hunting tribe had their eyes on Chen Zong. Their terrifying murderous intent condensed into a single point, turning into a chilling chill that made Chen Zong's hair stand on end. In an instant, as the shadow approached at an astonishing speed, a cold black light burst out like broken starlight. It pierced through the air mercilessly, causing Chen Zong's muscles to tighten and his hair to stand on end. The dark black light condensed into a single point, carrying an extreme murderous intent. It pierced through the air, causing Chen Zong to feel like he was being penetrated. Fast. That dim light was extremely fast, as if it had transcended the limits of time and space. Of course, that speed did not transcend the limits of time and space. Even at the peak of the hunting tribe, they could not transcend the limits of time and space. It was only because their cultivation was suppressed that their thinking and other aspects were severely affected that they could not accurately perceive it. That was why they felt that this fast attack had transcended the limits of time and space. From another point of view, this attack was terrifying and difficult to dodge. It was too fast. Even if Chen Zong's control of his body had reached an astonishing level, he could not dodge it in an instant. However, Chen Zong did not think of dodging it. His eyes narrowed slightly, and there seemed to be a shadow of a sword reflected in his pupils, turning into a dazzling sword light. In the next moment, an extremely cold sword will erupted, covering a radius of several meters. The formless sword will seemed to have turned into a substance, terrifying to the extreme. That dim light was cold, but Chen Zong's sword was even colder. In the previous battle, Chen Zong did not show any killing intent. But now, his opponent showed no mercy. His killing intent exploded, causing Chen Zong to show no mercy. The killing intent condensed on the sword and turned into sword light. The extremely cold sword light was like the cold sword chi from the aurora, like the thunder sword power that could split the sky. The sword vibrated rapidly along with Chen Zong's wrist. Although this sword was ordinary, its toughness and hardness were not bad. The shadow shuttled through the crowd, and the sword light pierced through the air. It was as if two enemies met on a narrow path, and the stronger won. It was as if his essence, energy, and spirit had all merged into this sword. There were no other distracting thoughts. There was only purity, extreme purity. Under the shocking impact of the sword will, the shadow seemed to be shocked. It paused for a moment and felt an extremely cold chill invade its body. It wanted to freeze its body, and the light that was attacking also paused for a moment. This pause was the separation of life and death. The sword light rushed forward and pierced through the air. It also possessed an extremely terrifying might. After it directly shattered the dim light, it continued forward with irresistible force and swept through everything before it. Kill. The sword light disappeared, and the shadow also appeared, revealing its body. It was dark all over, as if it was wearing close-fitting night clothes. Its body muscles were streamlined, and it was incomparably strong like a cheetah. Its hands had sharp claws that were half a foot long, which could be called a killing weapon. It was the Serene hunting clan. One sword kill, the sword will is amazing. The tower spirit was even more surprised. Not many people saw the scene just now. Only the tower spirit saw it clearly, not missing any details. The one-horned alien also happened to catch a glimpse of the scene. Suddenly, his face changed and his eyes turned red. A terrifying killing intent overflowed. "Human, you're going to die." With a loud roar, the one-horned alien suddenly rushed forward. Chen Zong only felt an even more terrifying killing intent. His whole body trembled and his hair stood on end. "It's time to enter the next round." A voice resounded. Immediately after, the 99 people who held the tower tokens in their hands froze. None of them could move. The one-horned alien who rushed towards Chen Zong had a ferocious and murderous look on his face, but his entire body seemed to be frozen. He could not move, and he could only maintain the posture of rushing forward. The others were also suppressed by a force. This force was not very strong, but because everyone had temporarily lost their cultivation, they could not resist at all. You wait. Those who did not get a tower token leave. As the tower spirit's voice fell, numerous figures began to emit light. In the next moment, over 2,000 people disappeared one after another. In the end, only 88 people remained. Every single one of them had obtained at least one tower ascension token. Once the tower tokens were obtained, there was fighting. After a few rounds of fighting, the dust finally settled. A small number of people obtained 2 or even 3 tower tokens. However, there was no difference between getting 2 or 3 pieces and getting 1 piece. Only one person can reach the top. The afterglow of the afterglow shone again, and the tower spirit's figure appeared. 88 people, the winner will reach the top. As soon as the tower spirit finished speaking, layers of light lit up. Layer by layer, it continued to rise until it reached the top. In an instant, the tower was divided into layers. The middle was empty, and only the 4 sides were clearly separated. The first layer had 88 rooms, the second layer had 44 rooms, the third layer had 22 rooms, the fourth layer had 11 rooms, and so on. The higher one went, the fewer rooms there were. On the first floor, the 88 people who had obtained the tower tokens were all forced into the small room under the influence of a force. Seeing this, Chen Zong immediately understood what was going to happen next. Fight. A one-on-one battle, a battle to determine the winner, and even a battle of life and death. In an instant, Chen Zong felt his blood boiling. His essence, qi, and spirit were bursting. His sword intent condensed and shot straight to the sky. Then the first battle will be between you and me. The tower spirit's gaze swept over, and then it tapped its finger lightly. 2 people appeared in the empty space in the middle at the same time. The winner can ascend to the next layer. You're just a tower spirit, and you dare to tease us like this? One of them stared at the tower spirit, furious. If not for the fact that he was weak, he would definitely attack the tower spirit directly. If that's the case, you can leave. The tower spirit pointed casually. Without any hesitation, the person who spoke turned into a ray of light and flew out of the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda, appearing outside. Naturally, his opponent won and entered the second layer. Everyone was speechless at this. To be honest, the tower spirit's actions did not make people feel good. It was a bit forced. Of course, this depended on one's thoughts. If you did not care, then it did not matter. If you cared, you would feel aggrieved. The more you thought about it, the more uncomfortable you would feel. In the end, you would explode in anger. Chunzong did not care about this at all. His goal was to get one of the 3 great void divine artifacts. Because of his strength, he did not have the chance to get the great void thunderclap robe. As for the void-shattering mirror, he did not look for it because of an accident. Now, only the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda had a chance to get it. Since that was the case, Chunzong did not care about anything else. Whether it was forced or teased, in the end, he was not strong enough. If there was a sovereign here, would the tower spirit of the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda dare to make such arrangements? Since he could not resist, then he would act according to the rules. The world was like this. Either you followed the rules or you broke them. The second battle began. The previous incident made everyone know that the tower spirit was not moved by force or persuasion. It could not resist his power, so they had to follow the rules first. Fight, fight, fight. The third battle. The fourth battle. The 10th battle was Chunzong's turn. Chunzong's opponent was a transcendent tier elite from the myriad tribulation divine flame mountain. In fact, other than Chunzong, the rest of the people who stayed were all in the transcendent tier. If they still had their cultivation, Chunzong would not have stood a chance. But now, relying on his martial arts attainments, Chunzong was not afraid. Even if he was facing a Tao master, Chunzong was not afraid at all. The outcome would only be known after the battle. You are Chunzong. Rumor has it that you have the title of Unparalleled Divine Sword. I wonder if it is true. The elder of the myriad tribulation divine flame mountain had never seen Chunzong before. However, he had heard of Chunzong's name. After all, Chunzong had caused quite a stir in the myriad tribulation divine flame mountain. You will know after you try. Chunzong smiled and raised his long sword in front of him. It could be used to attack and defend. It was a perfect combination. For a moment, the elder of the myriad tribulation divine flame mountain did not know where to start. Take my punch. After observing for a while, the elder struck decisively. He could not delay any longer. Otherwise, it would affect his stamina. In fact, the cultivation of the myriad tribulation divine flame mountain did not pay much attention to martial arts. After all, the last thing they needed to cultivate was flames. They mainly focused on flames and the divine ability. However, even with that being the case, the power of this elder's fist was extremely astonishing. Bringing with it an intense burst of fire, the fist smashed toward Chu Feng. Chunzong did not move, but his eyes became brighter. Just as the elder's punch was about to hit him, a sword light suddenly flashed. The man and the sword became one, as if they had broken through the boundary. The sword and the fist crossed each other in an instant. Their backs faced each other, and Chunzong sheathed his sword. Good swordsmanship. You live up to your name of Unparalleled Divine Sword. The elder of the myriad tribulation divine flame mountain did not turn his head. Instead, he said this and fell forward. A line of blood appeared on his neck. Killed with a single strike. The pupils of the others shrunk like needles. They could not see clearly at that moment. It was too terrifying. Chunzong heaved a sigh of relief. Although the elder of the myriad tribulation divine flame mountain was very powerful, It was also his best move in his current state. There were about 10 other people left. Their pupils shrunk like needles. This was especially true for the one-horned man. When he looked at Chen Zong, his eyes were filled with cold, killing intent. It was as if he had an irreconcilable feud with Chen Zong. The elder of the myriad tribulation divine flame mountain was not really dead. After all, he was in the heavenly ethereal world suppressing pagoda and was under the control of the pagoda spirit. Although he seemed to be dead, he was just faking his death. However, he was not dead. He had lost and had to leave the pagoda. As Chen Zong won, he naturally advanced to the second level. The one-horned man appeared and attacked violently with his arms. With just 3 punches, his opponent vomited blood. Even his internal organs were shattered. 44 people were defeated and 44 people were victorious. They entered the second level and began the second round of fighting. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.